Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. I grew up in Monterey, California, and between 1978 and 1981, my family moved around quite a bit. Eventually, in 1982, we settled in Hollister, California. Back then, Hollister was just a small town, quiet and simple. The house we moved into was an old Victorian. It was only one story, but something about it always felt eerie. There were rumors that someone had taken their own life in what used to be the attic, but we never paid much attention to those stories. Looking back, though, I've always felt connected to the paranormal, like I could sense things others couldn't. We lived in that house for 7 years, and during that time, I had at least 15 to 20 experiences that I couldn't explain. My family had their own stories too, but for some reason, we never talked about them much. Maybe we didn't want to believe. In 1987, we moved back to the Monterey Peninsula, leaving that house, and whatever was in it, behind. But the story I want to share isn't about that house. It's about something that happened years later, when my two sisters and I moved into an apartment in our 20s. When we first saw the apartment, it was in terrible shape. The walls had holes punched into them, like someone had been in a rage. The carpet in the living room had a dark, burnt-looking stain right in the middle. I remember feeling uneasy the moment we stepped inside. Something wasn't right. A friend of my sister's assured us the owners would fix it up before we moved in. And sure enough, when we came back, the place looked almost brand new. Fresh paint, clean floors, everything felt different. Well, almost everything. The kitchen still had its outdated 1970s look, but that was the least of our worries. A month went by, and we had settled into our routine. The apartment was small, but it worked for us. The upstairs bedroom was big enough for all three of us, even though we were still in the process of getting furniture. We took turns. 2 of us would sleep in the queen bed while the third slept on the floor. At first, everything was fine. We went to school, we worked, and we came home at night, exhausted but happy. But there was one thing that started to bother us, something we noticed every single night. The baby next door. We never actually saw the child, but we heard him. Every night, like clockwork, he would start crying. But this wasn't just any crying. It was different. It was frantic, terrified, almost painful. It sounded like he was scared of something. And every night, we would hear a parent come in, trying to soothe him. At first, we didn't think much of it. Babies cry, right? But after a while, it started to get under my skin. It didn't sound normal. It sounded wrong. One night, as the crying started again, I turned to my sister and said, "If someone is hurting that child, I'm calling the cops. I'll report them to CPS." And I meant it. The sound of that baby crying haunted me. The next night, it happened again. That same terrified wailing. I couldn't take it anymore. I told my sister, "That's it. Tomorrow, I'm making the call." But before bed, I asked her to say a prayer, out loud. I wanted her to pray for the baby, for whatever was going on next door. It was my turn to sleep on the bed that night, while my other sister took her spot on the floor. My sister started the prayer, her voice calm but steady. "God, we come to you tonight to thank you for this day you've given us. We ask that you keep us safe this evening and help us have a good day tomorrow. We also ask that you watch over the child next door, the one who cries every night. We hope no one is hurting him in any way. Please be with him tonight," and she never finished. The room changed. We all felt it. Something huge entered the room. It was heavy, like the air had thickened around us. My sister stopped praying. My other sister, who had been on the floor, jumped into the bed with us. None of us said a word, but we all felt the same thing. "Do you feel that?" I whispered. They both nodded. We were terrified. Whatever it wasn't just in our room. It was moving. We could feel it. It passed through our space and into the apartment next door. I barely managed to whisper, "Keep praying." My sister did. She continued the prayer, her voice shaking at first, but then growing stronger. And just like that, the heaviness started to lift. The air felt lighter. The fear slowly faded. Then I noticed something. "Do you hear that?" I asked. My sisters shook their heads. "The baby. He's not crying anymore." We stared at each other, realizing at the same moment that for the first time since we had moved in, the apartment next door was completely silent. That night, we made a decision. From that moment on, we would pray out loud every single night before bed. It wasn't long after that we moved out of that apartment. And honestly, it was the best decision we ever made. Even now, after all these years, my sisters refuse to talk about what happened that night. They believe that if they don't talk about it, maybe it didn't really happen. But I know it did. And I wonder, has anyone else ever experienced something like this? Because sometimes I still think about that night, and I still wonder what exactly we felt in that room. It was 1997. I was 20 years old, just months away from my 21st birthday. My life had been filled with nothing but spirits. These are my stories. I grew up in Cedar Grove, New Jersey, in a semi-old house built in the 1950s. The strange occurrences began when I was very young, too young to understand what I was witnessing. One of my earliest memories still lingers vividly in my mind. I must have been around 5 or 6 years old, playing in the living room with my older brother John, who was 7 years ahead of me. Everything was normal, until it wasn't. I noticed my brother staring, wide-eyed, at the wall. My gaze followed his, and that's when I saw it. It looked like someone had thrown a small jug of paint at the wall, except it had eyes. Two dark, watching eyes. It didn't move, didn't change, didn't make a sound. It just studied us. We were frozen in place until our mother walked in. The moment we turned our heads to her, it disappeared. That night, I told my father what had happened. His reaction wasn't what I expected. He didn't tell me I was imagining things. He didn't laugh it off. Instead, he told me something that stayed with me. Before I was born, my Aunt Anne had promised, on her hospital bed, that no matter what, she would live to see me enter this world. But she never did. She passed away just 2 days after I was born. And yet, my father told me, the day I was brought home from the hospital, he had turned back toward my crib and seen a shadow standing over me. He thought it was my aunt. But was it? Years passed, and as I grew older, the activity in the house continued. By the time I was 8, my brother and I no longer shared a room. He had moved downstairs, and I had kept our old bedroom. That was when things started getting worse. One night, I woke up for no reason and wandered into my parents' room. I saw them both sleeping, peaceful and undisturbed, but something drew my eyes to the far wall, just beyond their bed. There, floating just 2 feet from the wall, was an eye. It glowed orange in the darkness, human-like, but wrong. The whites of the eye were orange, the iris a deep, unsettling brown. I wasn't afraid, not at first. I was curious. I reached out and passed my hand through it. It didn't react. I stepped behind it, and in an instant, it was gone. I crawled into bed with my parents that night, not because I was scared, but because I felt like I needed to be near them. Meanwhile, downstairs, John was struggling. He couldn't sleep in his new room. He didn't know why. He just couldn't. He would complain about it constantly, but my mother brushed it off, telling him he needed time to adjust. But things weren't normal. At night, the lights in my room would flicker on and off as I drifted to sleep. Objects would break, with no explanation. Footsteps would echo when no one was walking. I was only 11 when I finally worked up the courage to tell my mother. She dismissed it, saying I was drinking too much soda before bed, that it was all in my head. And then, my parents started remodeling the basement. They tore out the old stairs, covered the hole, and built new ones leading down from the living room. I wonder sometimes if the disturbance unsettled them, the things that lived in our house, because after that, everything changed. The first time I truly felt it, I was 12. I woke up one morning feeling different. When I tried to sit up, I couldn't move. Something was holding me down. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, pressing against me. pinning me in place. My breath caught in my throat. My pulse pounded. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the feeling to go away. And then, all at once, it did. I sat up, gasping, my room completely still. The weight was gone, but the fear remained. I never told anyone. My mother wouldn't believe me. My father was tired of hearing my complaints. And John, he already made fun of me enough. Then came the night I heard the voice. I was 13, excited because my parents had planned a rare trip to the beach. We were supposed to wake up at 5 a.m. to pack, so I forced myself to go to bed early. I turned off my TV, shut off my lights, and lay down, staring at the ceiling. That's when I heard it. A voice whispering directly into my ear. It was deep. Male. "You are evil," it said. "I will take you to hell with me." I squeezed my eyes shut, frozen in place. "You don't deserve your parents," it hissed. "They don't deserve a whiner like you." It kept talking, kept threatening. 10 minutes of pure terror. I never opened my eyes. I was afraid of what I'd see if I did. When the voice finally stopped, I bolted from my bed, ran to the light switch, and flipped it on. Nothing was there. The next morning, I told my parents. They laughed it off, told me to stop drinking so much soda. I never drank soda again before bed, but that didn't stop him from coming back. By the time I was 14, things had calmed down. Just the occasional shadow, the unexplained noises. Nothing too extreme. But then I moved into the basement, and I met him. The moment I settled in, something felt wrong. The air was heavier. The silence was deeper. Even my dog, Flurry, refused to come downstairs unless I was with her. The first night, I left the kitchen light on. It made me feel safer. But just as I started drifting off, the light shut off by itself. Then came the whispers. Not a single voice, but many, murmuring just beyond my reach. I turned on the light. The whispers stopped. I walked into the small TV room. Nothing. But the air was different. Charged, electric. The hair on my arms stood up. I tried speaking, asked if this was the same presence from my old room. Silence. I asked if this was a prank. Still nothing. Then, all the lights went out at once. I ran. I never slept down there again. I tried to fight back. I read every book I could on ghosts, on hauntings, on how to banish them. I even learned to communicate with one of them, a little boy who lived in my old room. He was different, kind, but the man in the basement, he wasn't, and he never left. I've since moved far away, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear the footsteps, still feel the weight of something unseen, still remember the voice in the dark, whispering my name. And I wonder, was I ever truly alone? I lived in that house until I was 9, sharing it with my mom, brother, and sister. My stepdad stayed with us sometimes, but not always. I remember dreading bedtime. Every night, she would be there, standing in my bedroom doorway, her hands reaching out. She was young, beautiful, with long red hair flowing over her shoulders. She always wore a white gown, and on her head sat a round crown, one that looked like it was made of little brown sticks. I was terrified of her. Every night, I crawled into bed with my mom, hoping to feel safe, but no matter how much I cried or shook her, she never woke up. Some nights, the lady stood at the foot of my bed instead of the doorway, just watching. I wasn't the only one who saw her. Sometimes my brother or sister did too. One afternoon, my 3 cousins were over, and we were all playing in the living room when my sister's screams cut through the house. We ran to her room, and there she was, the lady in white, walking toward my sister with her hands out. We all started screaming. My brother yelled at her to leave. Everything happened so fast, and then she was gone. My sister was shaking, crying uncontrollably. My cousins left that day and never spent the night at our house again. My sister's boyfriend, who had been there too, refused to come back. After that, my sister had to meet him somewhere else. Even when my cousins visited later, they never set foot inside the house. They only talked to us from the front porch. Years passed. and my brother and I eventually talked about what had happened. He told me that, along with the woman, he used to see little boys' faces. I never did. I only ever saw her. Strange things happened all the time in that house. At night, we heard noises coming from the kitchen, and in the morning, we'd find dishes stacked up on the floor, as if someone, or something, had carefully placed them there. It happened so often that we got used to it. The bathroom was another problem. It had 2 doors, both with eye-hook locks on the inside. Sometimes, those doors would be locked, and we had no way to open them. My brother would get scared and call the police. They came out more than once. Each time, they found the bathroom window locked from the inside. The strange part, that window was at least 8 or 9 feet high, too high for anyone to reach from outside. The officers never had an explanation. I remember one night when a policeman and policewoman came together. After looking around, they told us the house felt strange, haunted. We hated calling them so often, but we didn't know what else to do. Then things started changing, especially with my mom. She wasn't herself anymore. Things got bad, and by the time I was 9, I was placed in foster care. My brother and sister were older, so they moved out on their own. Even in my foster homes, I was always afraid at night. I kept expecting to see her again, but I never did. Someone once told me never to go back to that house, and I never have. It's still there in Los Banos, California, near downtown. I try not to think about it, but lately I have. I wonder about the woman in white. Why was she always there? What did she want? And why did she wear that strange crown? My mom kept old photographs out on the back porch, pictures of people we didn't know. My brother used to say they creeped him out. Sometimes I wonder if she was in one of them. Years later, my mom got better, and when I was about 11 or 12, my brother took her in. I got to see her every day and take care of her until she passed. My brother is gone now too, but the house, it still lingers in my mind, and I still don't know who she was. This happened in my grandmother's backyard, now my mother's. I was about 7 years old, sometime in the mid-80s, and yes, that does make me feel old. It was during the day, and I was completely alone. My grandmother, my mom, and my brother had all gone to GMCO. Yeah, that was a long time ago. The store was just at the end of our block, so leaving me home alone for a little while wasn't a big deal back then. I was in the backyard, doing something I actually enjoyed, gardening. I know a little odd for a kid, but I liked it. I was watering our grapefruit tree, one of the best grapefruit trees ever, just standing under it, watching the water pool around its roots. I remember seeing little black ants scrambling, trying to escape what must have felt like a flood to them. And then, everything changed. Dino, our chow chow, started barking like crazy. I mean, losing his mind. He was to my left, slightly behind me, and at first, I thought he was barking at me, which was weird because Dano and I were best buddies. But then I noticed he wasn't looking at me. He was barking at something behind me. I turned around, still holding the hose, and saw nothing. I was standing just a foot or two away from the backyard tool shed. It was one of those small aluminum ones, maybe 10 feet long, 8 feet wide, and about 6 feet tall at its peak. We kept the lawnmower, Christmas decorations, and random storage in there. I glanced back at Dano, and that's when I realized something terrifying. He wasn't just barking behind me. He was barking up. I turned again, slowly this time, and lifted my eyes. And that's when I saw him. A man, tall, painfully thin, standing on the roof of the tool shed, staring at me. No, not just staring, glowering. Everything about him was tense, rigid, like he was holding in something angry. He wore all black, tight-fitting clothes. No color, no details, just black. I felt frozen. My mind raced. Who is this? How did he get up there? And then, a single desperate thought ran through my head. If I don't look at him, maybe he'll go away. I dropped my eyes to the ground. Dino was still barking, but the fear in my chest was too much. I dropped the hose, and I ran. I bolted across the yard, through the kitchen door, and slammed it shut. My heart was pounding as I peeked through the curtain, terrified of what I might see. But there was nothing. No man. Just Dino, still staring up at the grapefruit tree, his fur bristling. And that's when I realized something even stranger. That shed? It was flimsy. I knew for a fact that it couldn't support anything heavy. When my mom had us clear off fallen leaves, even stepping lightly made the whole thing groan. A bird could land on it, and you'd hear it. A full-grown man. Impossible. Even if he had somehow been there the whole time, the moment he moved, he would have made a ton of noise jumping down. But I heard nothing. He was just gone. I sat in the living room waiting for my mom and grandmother to come home. Luckily, it wasn't a long wait. When they did, I told my mom everything. She looked alarmed. She didn't question me. She didn't say I imagined it. Instead, she praised Dino, giving him extra attention and treats. And that was it. Life went on. For years, I barely thought about that day. Until I was 19. It was late at night, and I was out with friends. After a night of dancing, we stopped at an IHOP before heading home. We had just left the restaurant and were standing in the parking lot, talking before getting into our cars. I was leaning over the roof of my car, joking with my friends. Just as I reached for my keys, I glanced up and froze. He was there, standing across the parking lot. Same tall, thin frame. Same black clothes. Same cold, rigid stare. But this time, he was standing inside a bush, not behind it. Inside it. Like the branches and leaves weren't even there. Like he had just risen out of it. My stomach dropped. I had the exact same reaction as when I was 7. I looked down, pretended I didn't see anything, and hurried to unlock my car. In those few seconds, I kept my head low, my heart pounding. I opened the doors, let my friends in, and before getting in myself, glanced back. He was gone. I never told anyone. Not then. Not for years. And I haven't seen him since. But now I'm 30. And sometimes I wonder, is he due for another visit? I really, really hope not. What do you think? Have you ever seen something like this? This happened at my grandparents' home on El Dorado Street in Pacoima, California. It was 1952, and I was just 4 years old. At the time, I was sleeping in one of the garage bedrooms. The room was big, with plenty of space to move around. It had a queen-sized bed, where my mom usually slept with my little brother, and 2 twin beds. I slept on one of the twin beds, and my younger uncle slept on the other, just to my right. That night, my mom wasn't there, so my brother was asleep on the queen-sized bed behind me. Everything was quiet. At some point in the middle of the night, something woke me up. I wasn't sure why. There was no sound, no movement, but something inside me told me to turn around and look at my mother's bed. I slowly turned my head and saw what looked like a black coat or sweater draped over the bed, trailing down to the floor. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then the black shape started moving. I watched as it slowly lifted what looked like a head and shoulders, turning away from the bed and facing me. The moment I realized it wasn't a coat, I quickly turned back, pulling the blanket up over my head. I squeezed my eyes shut as tightly as I could, pressing my hands over them, willing myself not to see whatever it was. But it didn't matter, because I still saw it. Even with my eyes closed, I could see his glowing green phosphorus eyes locked onto me, staring right through the darkness. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. But I could feel him. He started walking. Slowly, carefully, he moved around the head of my bed, gliding toward my left side. Even though I was pretending to sleep, I knew he was still staring at me. His steps were deliberate, cautious, as if watching to see if I would react. I kept my eyes shut, heart pounding, hoping he would go away. And then he did. Without a sound, he walked straight toward the wall and disappeared through it. He wasn't shaped like a normal man. He had arms and legs, but he was short, misshapen, almost moldy looking, like something that had been rotting in the dark. He had no clear neck, and his body was uneven, almost like it had been twisted into the wrong shape. But his eyes, those terrifying green glowing eyes, stayed burned into my memory. I didn't scream that night. I don't know why. Maybe I was too scared to make a sound. But the very next day, I told my mother I didn't want to sleep in the garage anymore, and I moved back into the house. I never saw him again. A month later, we had a family reunion, and my older uncles came to stay at the house. With so many people visiting, they set up extra beds in the garage bedrooms, packing 7 family members into the space where I had once slept alone. The next morning, my uncles came into the kitchen, laughing loudly, cracking dirty jokes, teasing each other about the little headless a #% hole they had been chasing out of the garage in the middle of the night. One of my uncles had woken up around 2 a.m. and saw a small shadow figure in the garage. Thinking it was an intruder, he sat up and yelled, "Aye, what are you doing in here? Get out." The figure bolted, running toward the backyard. My uncles, unafraid, jumped up and chased after it. They ran through the yard, yelling at him to face them like a man. They swore at him, taunting him, threatening that he was lucky they didn't catch him. But before they could get close, the figure ran straight into a large cactus and disappeared. It was only after they stopped chasing it that they realized something was wrong. It wasn't human. At first, they thought he had no head, but after getting a better look, they realized he was just so misshapen that his head blended into his body. Whatever he was, he never came back after that night. Many years later, when I was married and living in Northern California with my husband and 3 children, I began dedicating myself to the study of the Bible and Christianity. One day, I started thinking about that shadow figure from my childhood, and I felt sorry for him. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I had spent so many years fearing him, never really considering what he was or why he had been there. Maybe he was trapped, lost, suffering in a way I couldn't understand. So I did the only thing I could think of. I prayed for him. I asked God to give him peace, to let him rest, to help him move on. And that was a mistake, because after that, I started having nightmares. I don't know what he was or why he appeared in that garage. I don't know if he had once been human or if he was something else entirely. But whatever he was, I don't think he wanted to be prayed for. I never prayed for him again, and the nightmares stopped. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? My name is Voice, and I'm 20 years old. 2 days ago, on Friday, right after classes, Nazu told me to drive straight to their house after grabbing some clothes and the usual hygiene necessities for a sleepover. I had a bad feeling about it. Maybe it was the sudden invitation, or maybe it was Iris's off-kilter cousin, the one with the need to do maniac things, like lighting his dog's poop on fire to roast a marshmallow. Either way, I didn't like it. So, along with my overnight bag, I packed 15 lavender-scented candles, a bit of sage, some black sand, never hurts, and incensed sticks, just in case. When I arrived, the door to their 2-story house clicked open, and I strolled in silently, with the exception of my chains, bells, and keys chiming in time with the booms of greeting from Iris and Nazu. I tossed my keys onto the side table, slumped onto the couch, and stretched my legs onto the wooden coffee table. Their nervous yet eager faces practically screamed trouble. I raised an eyebrow and, expressionless as usual, called out, "Well?" Iris bit her lip. Nazu grinned madly and pulled out something I wished he never knew about. Angel sand, or as most people call it, the Ouija board. My frown deepened. Without a word, I uncrossed my legs, picked up my keys and my bag, and walked toward the exit. Iris pleaded, "Oh, come on, Voice. If it's that bad, we promise to use it only this once and never touch it again." I paused, thought about it for 2 seconds, shrugged, kept walking. "Please." I stopped mid-step and let out a long sigh, then stomped back to the living room. I clearly stated that I wanted no part in their future pain and misery. They agreed, quickly, after I threatened to pour bleach into their curry when they weren't looking. As they set up their gateway to doom, I reached into my bag and pulled out the black sand and 5 candles. While they prepared the board, I poured the black sand into a wide protective circle around myself, lit the candles, and stepped inside. They eyed me. I glared back and muttered, "What? I like living." Kneeling inside my circle, I lit 3 incense sticks from the candle flames, held them in my hands, and waited. Nazu, of course, was the one to start the ritual, pricking his finger and letting some blood drip into a glass bowl of water. Which, okay, weird. I thought they just started asking questions, not adding a blood sacrifice. Iris followed, mirroring his actions, and then the questions started flying. The usual ones: what year did you die? Were you murdered? Stuff like that. Then, a question popped into my head. A simple one. I spoke aloud. Are you a demon? The Ouija board flew off the table, slamming onto the floor with a crack. My candles blew out. We all froze, blinked at each other. Nazu rubbed his head, and for once in his life acted smart, swiftly wrapping up the board and putting it away. Okay, no more. Iris nodded quickly. Agreed. Yawning, she glanced at the clock. Let's just go to bed. I put my items away, and we pulled out the sleeping bags. That night, we were out like lights. The next morning, screaming. Iris burst out of the bathroom, pale and jittery, her robe barely tied. I ran up the stairs, Nazu right behind me. We followed her back to the bathroom sink, and there it was, a black crow, dead. Its blood pooled around it, its throat slit so deeply, the head was nearly severed. But that wasn't the worst part. The tiny window was open, too small for anything to carry in an injured bird. No sign of a struggle, just the crow, the blood, and the sound of the faucet running. I made Nazu clean it up while I inspected the bird, searching for bullet wounds, claw marks, anything that explained how it died. But there was nothing, just the slit throat. I took the bird outside and buried it. That was that, or so I thought. 12:00 p.m. 3 hours later, we sat at the dining table, eating breakfast late because Nazu had somehow burned the cereal. Then, the lights shut off. The china plates on the shelves fell, one after another, in a perfect row. I barely managed to save the second one. The rest shattered. Then we found it. A piece of paper. Words scribbled onto it in uneven, scratchy handwriting. Derivir Iramthgin. I stared at it. Iris and Nazu looked at me. We all knew the same thing. That wasn't the end of this. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Since October 13th, 2008, what started as a series of strange and unsettling dreams has turned into something far more real, something terrifying that I never imagined could happen outside of sleep. I know that dreams can be dismissed as meaningless, but what I experienced on the night of February 7th, 2009, was no dream. Something came into my room. Something found me. It started with a recurring figure, an incubus, who appeared in my dreams. The first time I saw him, it was October 13th, 2008. In the dream, he was performing dark, sadistic acts on women who seemed to want it, as disturbing as that sounds. One of them even died in the process. Yet after everything, when he was done, he acted completely different, like a normal, even charming man. I remember speaking to him, saying, "You seem nice, though." His expression shifted into a wicked grin, and he shook his head slightly. Friendly, he corrected me. Something about that moment unsettled me, but for some reason, I still felt drawn to him. I said, "Even so, for some reason, I like you still." I don't know why I said it. Maybe I shouldn't have. As the dream progressed, I realized he was walking me home, but the closer we got, the more I began to feel a deep, creeping fear. I knew he was dangerous. I knew he could hurt me at any moment. I just wanted to get away. Then, out of nowhere, a blast of lightning struck the ground behind me, right where the incubus was standing. He leaped back, dodging it effortlessly. I turned in shock, only to see 3 angels in white descending from the sky. They were armed, their weapons crackling with energy. They looked beautiful and dangerous at the same time. I didn't want to be anywhere near whatever battle was about to happen. I turned to run, but one of the angels grabbed my right arm, stopping me in my tracks. He looked at me sternly and said, "Come on." Something inside me told me not to argue, not to question, just to obey. So I did. I climbed onto the angel's back, and the next thing I knew, I was far away from the incubus, transported somewhere that looked like an airport terminal. Moments later, I got a call on my cell phone. It was him. His voice was furious. "Why did you go with them?" I answered simply. I didn't think arguing with angels was wise. Then the dream ended. That was just the beginning. On January 9th, 2009, I had another dream. This time, it felt different, more personal. I was standing near a main street close to where I live. It was 4 a.m., no cars in sight. I was looking at a billboard for a concert I really wanted to go to, feeling excited about getting tickets. Then I turned around and came face to face with him. But this time he was different. He was dressed well, like he was going on a romantic date. His expression was softer, almost affectionate. He just stood there staring at me, saying nothing at first. I ignored him and turned away. That's when he snapped. His voice turned furious. "Hey, wait. What about?" Then his tone darkened, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "Just you wait. My full name. I'll find you." A deep, terrible fear ran through me. I didn't want him following me, didn't want him to know where I lived. So I took flight, literally, soaring into the sky, trying to lose him. But before I could escape, I felt something hit my hand. It was sticky, like the adhesive side of a note. I tried flicking it off, shaking my hand in panic as I flew through the dense treetops, hoping the branches would scrape it away. I didn't want him to track me. Finally, I made it home. I landed on my front porch and rushed inside. I woke up instantly, but the feeling of something on my hand remained. It was real. I sat up, shaking, my palm tingling with the sensation of something still attached to it. It was 2 a.m., and I started praying immediately, calling out to Michael the Archangel, begging for protection. And then came February 6th, 2009. It was mid-afternoon between 1 and 2 p.m. I was at home, listening to music, standing beside my bedroom window. The curtains were tied back, letting in the light. From where I stood, I had a clear view of the pine trees near the back fence. I casually turned my head toward the window, and there he was. A man was standing right outside, just 12 to 15 feet away, staring at me. It was him. Before I could react, his entire form shifted sideways, vanishing behind my curtain, a curtain that was already tied back. There was nowhere to hide, but he hid anyway. He was real. I felt a chill go through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't panic. I didn't even move. I just wrote it down. Then came February 7th, 2009. It was around 5 p.m. when I decided to take a short nap. I remember sleeping peacefully. No nightmares. No strange dreams. Just deep rest. Until I opened my eyes, and he was on top of me. A black shadow figure, leaning over my chest, staring directly into my face. I jerked in shock, my heart slamming in my chest. He was so clear, a full, solid form, shoulders, head, torso, but no distinct face. Just pure darkness, hovering inches above me. The second I locked eyes with him, he vanished. I wasn't paralyzed like others have described in sleep paralysis. I could move, I could breathe, and I knew it was him. I looked at my clock, 9:25 p.m. Forcing myself to stay calm, I laid back down and muttered, "So you found me. What do you want?" Silence. Nothing. Then, as I closed my eyes, I saw a flash of greenish hazel eyes, his eyes, staring at me, filled with something possessive and threatening. If his face had been that close to mine, then he had been watching me the entire time I slept. I spent the rest of the night praying. A few days later, I started noticing the same phrase appearing everywhere, in books, online, in random conversations. I found you. I have never played with Ouija boards, never touched tarot cards, never invited anything into my life. So why did he find me? Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? One sunny day, I was sitting on my bed, working on my college assignments. My schedule was packed with classes from Cypress College in California. I lived in Anaheim with my 2 little boys, who were away on vacation that semester. As I sat there, reading my journalism textbook, something strange happened. I was still on my bed, but suddenly, it felt like I could see into another world, clear as day. I was in the sky, floating above a helicopter. I could see everything around me. Oddly enough, I was moving closer to the helicopter, and I saw a Hispanic man in the pilot's seat. He was losing consciousness. His body went limp. It was like I was a spirit, but I felt physical at the same time. As I moved upwards, I saw a Caucasian man sitting next to the pilot. He was calm, yet I could sense the fear in him. He had a buzz cut, like someone in the army. I moved right into the pilot's seat, and in that moment, I realized the helicopter was spiraling downward fast. My heart raced with fear. I pulled at the controls, pushing every button I could think of, desperately trying to stop it. We were heading straight for a 1-story building, though there was a parking lot I hoped we would hit instead. I didn't want these men to crash. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the co-pilot turn his head slightly toward me. He stared at me for a few moments, and I met his gaze for a brief second. Then he went back to switching the controls, frustration visible on his face. Despite his attempts, it felt like he had already accepted that this was the end. The helicopter was still falling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I turned the helicopter to the right over and over again, trying to steer away from the building. But then I saw a man standing below in the parking lot. He was frozen in place, staring up at the falling helicopter. He didn't move, didn't run. He was watching, almost as if he was waiting for it to come down on him. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This man was about to be crushed, but he didn't seem to notice the danger. It was like he was stuck in that moment of fear, unable to move. I was fully aware that this wasn't a dream. I could still feel the reality of sitting on my bed in Anaheim. But in that moment, I felt completely hopeless. My worst fear was happening: the crash. The helicopter clipped the edge of the building and slammed into the parking lot. The impact was overwhelming. I felt it in my whole body, this powerful, deep thump. I could see the man below too, as the crash hit him. There was black smoke rolling and swirling around, with a huge burst of fire rising into the sky. I felt nothing but the intensity of the crash. The co-pilot kept his eyes forward, even as the world around him fell apart. The pilot had already lost consciousness before the impact. Just as quickly as it had happened, I found myself back sitting on my bed. My body was shaking, my mind reeling. It felt like I'd just experienced something I wasn't supposed to understand. I couldn't stay still. I needed to get out of that room. I ran out of my apartment, wanting to escape the feeling that was still lingering in me. I turned on the TV to distract myself, but as I watched the news, I saw the crash. It was Liv. I turned the TV off and ran outside, desperate to feel the warmth of the California sun and the life around me. I stood against the wall outside, shaking uncontrollably. My neighbors, a Hispanic family, noticed me. One asked if something was wrong. I didn't speak. I couldn't. His brother tried again in English, but I still said nothing. They looked at me strangely before going back inside their apartment. I couldn't go back into my apartment. I walked to a nearby gas station to clear my head, then back to my apartment. but I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I sat on the steps for hours, eventually going back in to pray. I asked God to keep me from going through that again, feeling like my spirit was still trapped in the crash. I stayed away from the TV, trying to distract myself with my kids' movies, but no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the memory of the helicopter crash. I kept asking myself why I was in that helicopter, why I couldn't stop it, and why it still happened. It haunted me, the fear in the men's eyes, the helplessness of the situation, and the man standing below, frozen in time. That night, I finally fell asleep. I slept deeply and woke up feeling somewhat better, like I could handle things again. I knew I had to finish my semester. For weeks, I avoided the newspaper. I didn't want to face what I knew would be in the news. Each morning, I tossed the Atlanta Times aside without looking at it. I didn't want to know what had happened. After a month, I felt like I was getting back to normal. But 6 years later, I felt ready to learn more about what I had witnessed. I went to the Alice Oviedo Library and asked the librarian to help me find the article from that year. She told me that 1991 was the last year the microfilm was available. We looked for a long time but couldn't find it. Then, I felt something strange. A thought crossed my mind. Maybe what I had seen wasn't a vision from the past, but from another dimension. Maybe I had already passed on, and what I saw was a glimpse into that other world. I kept searching, and then I found it, the article. There it was, the pilot, the co-pilot, the crash. It was all real. The co-pilot's expression was exactly as I had remembered it, stoic, facing forward, knowing the end was near. The article told me it had been a police helicopter, and the building I had tried to avoid was an elementary school. There was also a third man, the one who had stood frozen in the parking lot, waiting for the crash to happen. And then, years later, on January 11, 2009, I found out that an airport had been named in honor of the 2 officers who died that day, the fallen police officers who had been in the helicopter with me. We stayed on the Queen Mary on May 9, 2009, in room A107. I had been looking forward to it for weeks. The ship had a reputation for being haunted, and though we couldn't take any of the official ghost tours because of our 19-month-old son, I was determined to experience something on my own. I especially wanted to visit the first-class swimming pool, a place known for its ghostly activity. We arrived around 2:30 p.m. and checked in. As we walked up to our room, I noticed a small yellow flower on the floor in front of the door. It was fake. I picked it up and carried it inside, setting it down on the vanity. The moment we stepped into the room, a wave of nausea hit me so hard that I felt like I was on a moving boat. I turned to my husband and asked if the ship was swaying. He looked at me strangely and said, "Are you joking?" I wasn't. The motion sickness was overwhelming, but I brushed it off. We spent the next few minutes exploring the room, fiddling with the old knobs and switches, running our hands over the vintage fixtures. Eventually, I ignored the lingering nausea and left the flower where it was. A little while later, my in-laws arrived and checked into their room, at 113. As they unlocked their door, I froze. Another small yellow flower, identical to the one I had found, lay in front of their door. I turned to my husband and pointed it out. "Look, another yellow flower." He dismissed it, saying our son must have brought it with him. I wasn't convinced. We looked around their room for a bit, then got ready to go out for dinner. Just before leaving, I realized I had forgotten my phone. When I returned to our room to grab it, I glanced at the vanity, and there was the original yellow flower, exactly where I had left it. There was no way our son had carried it with him. As we walked down the hallway, I kept an eye out for more of those little flowers. There weren't any. Later that night, my in-laws watched our son while we took the Twilight Historical Tour. It was the only tour available that evening, but I didn't hesitate to sign us up, especially since one of the stops was the first-class swimming pool. Armed with both digital and disposable cameras, I was ready. As we walked through the ship, the tour guide shared details about its history. When we reached the promenade deck, He explained that the store, now called Pacific Times, had once been a cigar and pipe shop in the 1930s. My stomach flipped. Earlier that day, when my husband and I had first walked onto that deck, I had smelled a strong scent of cigar smoke. At the time, I had asked him if he smelled it, but he only mentioned food. Now I realized that I had smelled something that shouldn't have been there. Later in the tour, we visited the wheelhouse. As I peeked into one of the small rooms connected to it, a man walked past the doorway right in front of me. He was dressed in deep gray, like an old naval uniform. I stepped forward to follow him, but no one was there. The tour guide later explained that during World War II, when the Queen Mary was called the Gray Ghost, everything on the ship, inside and out, had been stripped of reflective surfaces and painted gray. Even the uniforms. My encounter suddenly made more sense. When we finally reached the first-class swimming pool, I immediately felt something off. The space was dimly lit, and I kept seeing movement out of the corner of my eye. Our tour guide even admitted to seeing something. As the group prepared to move on, I lingered behind, taking more photos. From the second floor, I looked down into the pool. My breath caught. There was water. I grabbed my husband's sleeve. "Look, there's water in the pool." I pointed at the deep end. He looked confused. "Where?" I turned back to the pool, and the water was gone. My stomach dropped. I walked around the area, trying to find an explanation, but the lighting in the room was too dim to have caused a reflection like that. When I asked the guide if the pool was ever filled, he shook his head. The pipes had been out of service for years. That night, we settled into bed, exhausted. My husband and son were asleep. I was a light sleeper, so I expected to wake up at the slightest sound. At 12:14 a.m., my eyes shot open. Deep, raspy breathing filled the room. At first, I thought it was coming from the next room, but then I realized it was inside. My heart pounded as I listened. My husband was facing me, breathing normally. There was no way my son could be making that sound. I sat up slightly, preparing to check on him. But then I froze. A man was standing to the right of the vanity. The moment I saw him, he melted into the shadow cast by the light from the window. He was tall, dark like a solid shadow, and I could smell cigar smoke in the air. For some reason, I didn't panic. I got up, checked on my son, and went back to bed. At 2 a.m., I woke up again. This time, I heard footsteps. They moved around the bed, stopping right in front of me. I didn't see anything, but I caught a faint whiff of cigar smoke before the scent disappeared. Again, I felt an eerie calm instead of fear. I drifted back to sleep. At 3:16 a.m., I woke to the sound of our door handle jiggling. I assumed it was a drunk guest at the wrong room, but the noise didn't stop. Just as I sat up to turn on the light, I saw something else. The bathroom door handle was moving. It twisted back and forth as if someone was trying to open it from the inside. My stomach clenched. I got up, opened the bathroom door, and found nothing. No sounds except the low hum of the fan. I checked on my son again. My husband was still asleep. As soon as I lay back down, an overwhelming wave of drowsiness hit me. Within seconds, I was asleep. The next morning, we woke up around 8 a.m. As I got out of bed, I noticed the left window was wide open. I asked my husband if he had opened it. He shook his head. "I thought you did, but I hadn't." The windows were so heavy that I had to brace my foot against the wall to open them, and they made a loud noise. If it had been open during the night, there was no way I would have slept through it. Before leaving, we stopped at the Starboard Bakery on the promenade deck for breakfast. My son kept laughing and clapping as we sat there. At one point, he walked over to an empty spot and started babbling, as if he were talking to someone. He held up his wind-up monkey toy, showing it off like he was demonstrating how it worked, but no one was there. The bakery had once been the ship's children's playroom. I would stay on the Queen Mary again in a heartbeat. Even though my husband didn't experience anything, I felt lucky to have had such an active night. I can't shake the feeling that the Shadow Man was someone connected to the ship's past. Whoever he was, he made his presence known. I moved to Los Angeles in 2000. At the time, I had a boyfriend, Eric, who lived in a small, overpriced one-bedroom apartment in Studio City. We both agreed it was time to find a bigger place that wouldn't drain our wallets. One day, we came across a charming one-bedroom apartment in Sherman Oaks. It had been built in the 1920s and had these beautiful built-in cabinets in the dining room. So much character. I was immediately drawn to it, but the moment we stepped inside, Eric tensed up. He barely glanced around before saying, "I don't like it. Let's go." He refused to even consider it. I thought it was odd, especially since the rent was only $600 a month, an incredible deal for the area. Still, he was adamant. He wouldn't live there. Fast forward 6 months, and things with Eric had completely fallen apart. He had a serious drinking problem, and our relationship had become exhausting. We had moved far out to Woodland Hills, and the long drives, combined with his issues, made everything unbearable. Eventually, I managed to break the lease and started looking for a place of my own. I was working temp jobs at the time, and one day, my supervisor, June, mentioned she owned a rental property in Sherman Oaks. She had a one-bedroom unit available for $625 a month. I was eager to check it out, but when I arrived, I felt a wave of shock. It was the exact same apartment Eric and I had looked at 6 months earlier. I hesitated for a moment. The lease was for a full year, which meant either no one had rented it in all that time, or someone had broken their lease early. Still, I loved the place and decided to move in. For the first year, everything was fine. I was hardly ever home, spending my weekends in San Diego working as a go-go dancer at clubs like Ultra and on Broadway. When I wasn't traveling, my daughter, Sierra, would visit from Fresno to spend weekends with me. Life felt busy, and I didn't give much thought to the apartment itself. But then, things started happening. It began with something small, but unmistakable. One afternoon, I was on the phone with a guy I was dating. As we talked, I stood in my dining room, where 2 framed pictures hung on the wall, evenly spaced apart. The frames were secured with sturdy hooks that latched onto the nails. There was no way they could just slip off. Then, out of nowhere, both pictures flew off the wall. I froze. My first thought was that we had just had an earthquake. I quickly asked my boyfriend if he had felt anything. He said no. I glanced around. Nothing else in the room was shaking. Slowly, I walked over to the frames, expecting to find that the nails had loosened or the hooks had somehow broken. But everything was intact. The nails were still in place. The hooks on the frames were still firm. It didn't make sense. I put the pictures back on the wall and even tried to shake them loose. They wouldn't budge. Not one, let alone both at the same time. It was unsettling, but I told myself it was just a weird coincidence. A week later, I came home late at night to a dark apartment. I walked over to turn on the floor lamp, reaching for the switch, just as the light flicked on by itself. I stood there for a moment, my heart picking up speed. Maybe it was just a wiring issue. Maybe the weight of my footsteps had shifted the floorboards, causing a loose bolt to connect. I shook off the unease. But little things kept happening. My TV remote disappeared and never turned up, not even when I moved out. My hairbrush vanished too, gone without a trace. These were small things I could brush off. Until the night everything changed. It was around Christmas time. By then, I had started a new job as a research scientist at UCLA's Center for Sleep Research. Between long hours at work and taking care of Sierra, I hadn't had time to shop in person. So I ordered her presents online. One of the gifts was a Cinderella castle playset. It lit up and played music with tiny dancing figures of Cinderella and Prince Charming. When the package arrived, I left the unopened box at the foot of my bed and went to sleep. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to loud music and flashing lights. I sat up, groggy and confused. The sound was coming from the foot of my bed. The Cinderella castle, still in its box, was playing its song on repeat, lights blinking in the darkness. I fumbled to turn it off, but the buttons wouldn't respond. The music kept going. Feeling uneasy, I carried the box to the kitchen and shut it inside. Then I closed the hallway door, my bedroom door, and threw a pillow over my head, trying to block out the sound. Eventually, I must have fallen back asleep. The next morning, the toy was silent. I shrugged it off. Maybe something had happened during shipping. Maybe it was just another glitch. On Christmas morning, Sierra unwrapped the gift, her face lighting up with excitement. "Oh, look what it does," I said, pressing the button to show her the lights and music. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. Still nothing. That's when Sierra pointed at the box and said, "Mommy, look. It says 4 AA batteries required." A cold chill ran down my spine. The night before, the castle had been playing on its own, but it had no batteries. I felt a deep, unsettled feeling I couldn't shake. I told Sierra we'd exchange it for a new one, and we did. But to this day, I can't explain what happened in that apartment. What do you think? Have you ever had something like this happen to you? Not long after Christmas, something happened that I'll never forget. When my family and I moved to the U.S., I didn't want to leave the Philippines, but I had no choice. The first week we arrived, my mom booked a stay at a hotel that was rumored to be haunted. She wanted us to have a family bonding experience, but I wasn't too thrilled. I was the type of person who preferred to go out with friends rather than spend time cooped up with family. On the second date, my mom suggested we explore the city. Everyone agreed except me. I knew that if I told her I didn't want to go, she'd insist, so I told her I wasn't feeling well and would rather stay in the room. She was hesitant and wanted to stay behind too, but I reassured her that I'd be fine. After a few minutes, she finally agreed and left with the rest of the family. For the first time since we arrived, I was excited. The whole room to myself. No one to bother me. I felt a little guilty for lying, but there was no turning back now. I grabbed the remote, flipped through the channels, and like most hotels, found absolutely nothing worth watching. I dropped the remote onto the bed without turning the TV off and went to rummage through my luggage for my PSP. I found it, but the battery had died during our drive to the hotel, and the charger was still in the car. Disappointed, I turned back to the TV, but to my surprise, it was off. I didn't even hear it power down. I knew I hadn't turned it off, but I ignored it. Maybe I'd accidentally hit the remote on my way to my bag. With nothing else to do, I grabbed a magazine from the table and started flipping through it. At some point, I noticed a page with 2 words cut out. I figured some kid had been messing with it. I didn't think much of it and kept reading. Minutes passed, and then suddenly, I heard the sound of glass breaking. My head snapped up. I listened. The noise had come from the bathroom. Heart pounding. I got up and slowly walked in. I expected to find something knocked over, but when I stepped inside, everything was perfectly in place. No broken glass. Nothing out of order. The silence that followed felt heavy, unnatural, like the room itself was holding its breath. Then, out of nowhere, a blast of music made me jump. I rushed back into the room. The TV was on, blaring MTV. I grabbed the remote and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. I flipped it over, checked the batteries. They were still in place. Frustrated, I threw the remote onto the bed and walked up to the TV. I reached behind it, pulled the plug, and finally, it turned off. My hands were shaking, my heart still racing. I needed air. I left the room and went down to the lobby, trying to clear my head. I stayed there for what felt like hours before finally deciding to go back. As I approached the door, I heard music playing again. My stomach twisted. Maybe my family had returned. I swiped the keycard and pushed the door open. The first thing I saw was a small boy standing next to the television. The screen was on, flashing with bright images. I froze. At first, I thought it was my little brother, but when I stepped closer, he vanished. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I had already had my fair share of experiences with spirits before. This was just another one. I was still spooked, but not as much as I probably should have been. I walked into the bathroom, deciding to splash some water on my face. That's when I saw it. The mirror had words stuck onto it, letters cut out from a magazine. "Help me." I stared at it. I turned back into the room, picked up the magazine I had been reading earlier, and flipped back to the page with the missing words. I held it up against the mirror. It was a perfect match. A chill ran down my spine. I turned back toward the empty room and spoke out loud. "Hey kid, are you here?" The TV switched on. I swallowed hard. "What's your name?" The channels started changing rapidly. "What do you need help with?" The TV flickered, then turned off completely. It was exhausting trying to communicate like this, so I finally just went to sleep. I woke up to a touch on my leg. My eyes flew open, expecting to see the little boy. Instead, my mom was standing there, shaking me awake. It was late in the afternoon, and we all went out to dinner. I didn't mention anything about what had happened. I wanted to forget about it. While we were eating, my little brother tugged on my shirt. I turned to him. "What's up?" He looked up at me confused. "Who was with you when you were sleeping?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" He pointed toward the direction of our room. "When I walked in, there was a boy sitting on the bed, staring at you." I felt ice spread through my chest. I forced a laugh. "You were probably imagining things." But I knew he wasn't. For the rest of our stay, I kept experiencing small things. The sensation of a hand touching mine, a light tug at my hair, the TV turning on and off when I was alone. None of it scared me. In fact, I liked it. The little boy never did anything to hurt me. He just wanted company. The day we checked out, as we packed up to leave, I felt a tug on my shirt. It was soft, hesitant, like he didn't want me to go. I hesitated. Then, without thinking, I spread my arms as if to hug him. A wave of cold air wrapped around my waist. I swallowed hard, feeling an unexpected lump in my throat. It felt like I was saying goodbye to a little brother I never knew I had. Tears pricked my eyes as I whispered, "Bye, little guy." I stepped out of the room, trying not to look back. As we drove away, I finally let myself glance at the hotel one last time. In one of the windows, our window, a small figure stood there, waving. I knew it was him. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. One night, I was putting Sierra to bed when she started fussing, insisting that I leave the light on in her room. I told her no, that she needed to go to sleep, and turned it off. She pouted, but eventually, I tucked her in and went back to my own room. 15 minutes later, a scream tore through the apartment. I ran into her room and found her sitting up in bed, pale as a ghost. Her eyes were wide with fear as she gasped, "Mommy, Mommy." The old lady pulled my blankets off me. I glanced down. Her blankets were crumpled on the floor at the foot of the bed. I sighed, shaking my head. "Sierra, you probably kicked them off in your sleep," I said. She insisted she hadn't. But I didn't believe her. I scolded her for telling stories and tucked her back in. I would regret that. A few weeks later, Sierra was staying with her dad for summer break, and I was home alone. My friends Jenna and Ashley were coming over to hang out. Gina arrived first, and as we sat in the living room, I finally told her about the strange things that had been happening. The pictures falling, the lights turning on, the feeling that something wasn't quite right. To my surprise, she didn't laugh. Instead, she nodded and said, "I know. I felt it too." She went on to tell me that, in the past, when she had babysat Sierra, she had noticed strange things she had never mentioned before. Before I could process that, Ashley arrived. She headed straight for the bathroom, but the moment she stepped into the hallway, she froze. She backed out and looked at me. "Oh, Anna, something is wrong in your house. The energy in your hallway, it's bad." I felt my stomach drop. We hadn't told Ashley anything. She had been to my place before and never said anything like that. But now she could feel it too. Later, Jenna and Ashley were in the bathroom getting ready to go out when I heard them both scream. They ran out, eyes wide with fear. "Your bathroom window just shut by itself," Jenna said, breathless. I hadn't seen it, but the look on their faces told me they weren't making it up. Then things escalated. I started noticing flies, dozens of them, always in my living room. No matter how many I got rid of, more appeared. The manager checked everything, windows, vents, crawl spaces, but nothing explained why they kept coming back. And the cold. Even in the middle of summer, my living room was freezing. I had space heaters, and the apartment had a built-in heating system, but it never helped. It wasn't just cold, it was bone-chilling, the kind of cold that felt unnatural. Still, I told myself it was nothing. I didn't believe in ghosts. Until one night. I had been up late, finally deciding to go to bed around 2 a.m. for some reason. I made a point to turn off all the lights and close both my bedroom and hallway doors. That wasn't my usual routine. Normally, I left the kitchen light on and kept the doors open. But that night, I didn't. I don't know why. I crawled into bed and started praying for my daughter, speaking softly to myself. That's when I heard it. A banging noise. At first, I thought it was my upstairs neighbor, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, but that didn't make sense. I stopped praying and listened. The noise stopped too. I started again. The banging started again. I tried to ignore it, but it got louder and louder until I realized it wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from inside my apartment. And then, my bedroom door started shaking. Not just a little. It rattled in the frame as if someone was trying to force their way in. My breath caught in my throat. My door didn't even have a lock, but whatever was on the other side was pushing against it violently. I was frozen in fear. My mind raced. Had someone broken in? Was there an intruder inside my home? Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I leaped out of bed, flipped on the light, and threw the door open, screaming at the top of my lungs. No one was there. But the hallway door was wide open, and so were all the other doors in the apartment. Every single light was on. The TV was on, blaring static. The stereo was on, also hissing with static. The computer was on. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the impossible scene around me. The doors I had just closed were now open. Everything that had been off was now on. Then, the windows started rattling. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, "Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!" A sudden knock at my front door made me jump. It was my building manager. She looked concerned. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I heard you screaming." Shaking, I told her everything. Her expression darkened. "Oh, I thought you weren't having any of the problems Carlos had." I blinked. "Who's Carlos?" She hesitated, then explained. Carlos had been the tenant before me. He had rented the unit right after Eric, and I had first viewed it in 2000. He signed a 1-year lease but fled after only 5 months. He claimed the apartment was haunted and refused to stay another night. No one ever stayed longer than 6 months. I had been there for almost 2 years. That night, I packed a bag and stayed at my boyfriend's place. The next morning at work, my boss, who was a renowned sleep specialist, pulled me aside. "What's wrong?" he asked. "You look shaken." I hesitated, then told him. I expected him to laugh, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded and said, "You should talk to my wife, Wendy. She knows about this stuff and can help you." Wendy was a psychologist. At first, I thought, great. He thinks I'm crazy. But when I met Wendy at lunch, she looked me in the eyes and said, "I believe you." She told me I needed to take my house back, to claim the space as my own. She gave me a simple plan. Go home during the day, open the windows, burn sage, and sprinkle salt water around the rooms. And most importantly, speak out loud. I felt ridiculous, walking through my apartment with a burning stick of sage, saying, "This is my home. You are not welcome here. Leave me and my daughter alone." But it worked. Things stopped. The air felt lighter. The cold was gone. The flies disappeared. I stayed for another 8 months. until my fiancé and I moved to West Hollywood to be closer to him. Curious, I later looked up the history of the apartment. I found records of 2 deaths. One was a natural death, an elderly woman who had lived there years before. Was she the one who pulled Sierra's blankets off that night? The other? A young man who had committed suicide in the detached garage. After we moved, Sierra finally told me there were many more things that had happened to her in that apartment. She had been too scared to tell me at the time. She was just a little girl, and she hadn't wanted to scare me. Even now, I still think about that place. I still wonder who, or what, was there with us. What do you think? Have you ever experienced anything like this? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I spent a good part of my teenage years living in a house in California with my dad and my 2 younger brothers. There was always a heavy, negative feeling in that house, though I didn't think much of it at first. Things started to shift after my dad invited one of his girlfriends to move in with us. She was always kind to me and would share stories about her experiences with ghosts. At the time, I thought they were just stories. Then, strange things started happening. It began with small black blobs that would dart around the house. At first, we'd only see them out of the corner of our eyes, little shadowy figures scooting along the floor or vanishing around doorways. Sometimes they appeared on the walls, sliding down from the ceiling, and when they were on the walls, they had wings, just 2 triangular wings sticking out from their dark, shifting forms. The only time I ever saw one straight one, I was up late watching TV, half distracted by an infomercial while working on homework. One of those shadowy figures suddenly flew across the top of the screen, slow and deliberate. It appeared in the middle and drifted off to the left. I thought maybe it was something on the TV, so I switched the channel. But it was still there. It flew past the left edge of the screen and disappeared. They never interacted with anyone. They just moved as if they had their own agenda. But I'm certain my cat saw them too. He would chase something invisible through the house, or suddenly stop and stare at an empty space like he was tracking something I couldn't see. Then came the footsteps in the hallway. They were loud, heavy, and angry, starting at the front door and stopping abruptly near the corner where my dad's room and the bathroom were. It always seemed to happen when only one person was awake or home. If I had a friend over, sleeping in the living room, nothing ever happened. But when I was alone, that's when I would hear it. The footsteps eventually escalated. Some nights, I would hear the front door open and slam shut. Other nights, the kitchen cupboards would slam so hard, I was sure someone was inside the house. Once, I even heard the sound of dishes breaking, a loud, sharp shatter that made my heart pound. But every time I got up to check, the door was locked, the kitchen was empty, and there was no broken glass to be found. Then came the footsteps on the roof. They always happened late at night, between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. No matter where we were in the house, whoever heard them would hear them moving right above their room, like something was pacing up there. The strange part? If more than one person was awake, we would all hear them at the same time, but from different directions. If I was in my room, I hear them moving toward my side of the house. But my dad, who slept on the opposite side, would hear them moving toward his side. It was as if they were everywhere at once. My dad heard it more than anyone. The footsteps would move across the roof, then he'd hear a loud thud on the deck outside his room. Every time he checked, no one was there. At first, we thought it might have been my ex-boyfriend stalking me. There were a few unsettling things that made sense, like the muddy footprints we found in the grass outside my bedroom window. One time, there was even a muddy handprint on the wall of the house, just below my window, and another on the roof. When we checked the prints, they were my exact shoe size, which matched my ex. He was heavy enough that it could explain the loud footsteps. But something still didn't add up. The footsteps weren't just loud. They had weight. When they moved across the ceiling, we could hear the wood creaking under pressure. But the house had an attic. The only way to get inside was through a small entrance inside my dad's bedroom closet. So unless my ex had been sneaking into the attic without ever being seen, it wasn't him. One night, my brothers climbed onto the roof to investigate. My older brother was over 200 pounds, and even when he jumped up and down, the sound was barely audible inside the house. Something about the attic space muffled the noise. But when we heard those footsteps at night, they were loud. Too loud. And then there was the cat. He always seemed to sense it before it started. He'd be playing or grooming himself, and then suddenly, he would freeze, ears back, eyes locked onto the ceiling. Every time, without fail, he'd stare at the exact spot where the footsteps would begin. His body would tense, his tail twitching, as if he was bracing for something. And then, just moments later, we hear it. Step, step, step. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know what those shadowy creatures were, or why the footsteps seemed to move across the roof when there was no way for someone to be up there without making a sound getting down. I just know that when we finally moved out, the house felt like a place I should never go back to. And I never have. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? My name is Wendy, and this happened back in 2003 and 2004. At the time, my husband, our 2 kids, and I were living at NCA's Miramar in California. He was deployed overseas, so it was just me and the kids at home. One night, while I was fast asleep, I suddenly jerked awake because someone had just pulled my big toe. Hard. I sat up immediately, heart racing. I yelled for the kids to get back in bed, assuming one of them was playing a prank. But then I realized there was no one there. I looked down. My foot was still under the covers, but my big toe was throbbing from being pulled so hard. I climbed out of bed and checked on the kids. They were both sound asleep. Still uneasy, I walked through the house, checking every room, making sure all the doors and windows were locked. Everything was secure, but I couldn't go back to sleep. Instead, I sat up in bed for hours, covers pulled to my neck, waiting for morning. When the sun finally rose, everything felt normal again. At breakfast, I asked the kids if they had come into my room during the night. They both swore they hadn't, and for a while, nothing else happened. The only thing that changed was that my son suddenly refused to sleep alone. He had bunk beds in his room, so either my daughter or I would stay on the top bunk with him until he fell asleep. I figured it was just a phase. Maybe a scary movie or a video game had spooked him. I had no idea what was really going on. A few weeks later, my sister came to visit from Arizona. I made up a bed for her on the couch in the living room, and her son stayed in my son's room. That first night, we all went to bed around 11 p.m. in the morning. When I walked into the living room, my sister was already up, folding her blankets, and she was packing. "We're leaving," she said. I blinked. "What? You just got here." She shook her head, looking shaken. "I can't stay here." I asked her what had happened, and she hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen. Then she said, "The cabinets. They were slamming, over and over, by themselves." I stared at her. "Wait, what?" She nodded. They were opening and closing all on their own. A cold shiver ran down my spine. She had no idea about my toe being pulled. I had told no one. Without another word, she finished packing. I tried to get her to stay for breakfast, but she wouldn't change her mind. Before she left, I took a picture of her and my nephew as a keepsake. She asked for a copy, so I printed one out. When I handed it to her, she froze. "You have an orb in this picture," she said. I had no idea what that meant, so she explained. Apparently, orbs were ghosts or spirits caught on camera. She handed the picture back and left immediately. I laughed about it later when I told my parents what happened, but deep down, I wasn't laughing. I was starting to wonder. That night, I was sitting in the living room watching TV. My husband's ship was on the news, so I was paying close attention. The kids were already asleep. The house was quiet. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone walk from the hallway into the kitchen. I turned my head fully and caught the movement. Thinking it was one of the kids, I called out, "Get back to bed." No answer. I got up, walked to the kitchen. No one was there. My stomach clenched. I walked down the hallway and checked the kids' rooms. My son was asleep. My daughter was asleep. I walked back to the living room, trying to shake it off. Maybe I was imagining things. Then, a few minutes later, I saw it again, a shadowy figure moving from the hallway to the kitchen. I jumped up, checked the house again, locked every door and window, looked under the beds and the closets. Nothing. Nothing was out of place. But I knew what I saw. By Monday, I was desperate for answers. I went online and started researching ghosts. One site said that if you take pictures with a digital camera, you can sometimes catch spirits in the images. So I grabbed my camera. I started taking pictures all over the house, morning, afternoon, night. And when I looked through them, orbs everywhere, especially in my son's room and the living room. I told my brother what was happening, and he decided to come visit to see for himself. While he was sitting on the couch, I snapped a picture. When I printed it, we both stared. There were orbs all over him. Later, we found out that ghosts are sometimes drawn to people with pacemakers, and my brother had one. Then the voices started. I would hear my name being called, clear as day. I'd answer, "What?" But there was no one there. At that point, I started visiting my parents in Arizona every weekend. I even asked a friend to bring her camera over. We took pictures in both my house and hers. Her house? Nothing. My house? More orbs. Then I took a picture that truly terrified me. I was standing on the other side of the living room, taking a picture near a small mirror on the wall. When I printed it out, I saw a face in the mirror, but it wasn't mine, and I was the only one home when I took that picture. By then, I had reached out to a paranormal investigation team. They were very interested in my house. They gave me a few tests, like snapping a picture over my shoulder while walking down the hallway. I did it, and when I looked at the photo, a large orb was right behind me. The team wanted to come investigate. We planned to wait until my husband returned from deployment so I wouldn't be alone. But before that could happen, my husband got orders to move to Japan. Within a month, we packed up and left. After we had settled into our new home in Japan, my son said something chilling. "I'm glad we moved," he said, "because people don't talk to me all night anymore." I froze. I had never told my kids what had happened in that house. Then my daughter admitted that she had heard voices too. She said she had a framed picture of my parents in her room, but at night, the picture would talk to her, and their lips would move. My parents are still alive. A year later, I found out that the entire street had been bulldozed. All the houses were rebuilt, except for one, where my house had been. They built a children's park. I wonder if they knew. I wonder if the new tenants had any problems. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? In 1989, just before graduation, during spring break, several of my oldest brother's high school friends were involved in a terrible motorcycle accident. One of them, a popular and well-liked varsity football player named Ron, was killed when a truck suddenly pulled out in front of him. The impact threw him from his bike, and though police arrived quickly, he passed away shortly after. I remembered Ron well. He had been to our house many times to visit my brother, and I'd spoken to him briefly at the door. He was tall, about 6'2", with blonde hair and blue eyes, always well-dressed, especially in his motorcycle gear, and he had a beautiful bike. He took great pride in his appearance. At school, he was known for always wearing his white 49ers ball cap. It was practically his trademark. He loved that hat and never seemed to go anywhere without it. At his funeral, his parents gave away some of his personal belongings to his close friends. My brother received Ron's favorite Metallica album, a picture from his junior year, and of course, the white 49ers cap. A week after the funeral, life had started to settle back into its normal routine. That evening, my brothers were in their bedroom watching TV and hanging out as they usually did. My mom was taking a nap in her room, and my dad was at work. I was alone in the kitchen, watching something funny on my mom's little TV that sat on the kitchen table. The way the kitchen was set up, I could see into the darkened living room and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. As I sat there, I heard my brother's bedroom door open and close. Footsteps followed, moving from the hallway into the living room. I didn't think much of it, just assumed one of my brothers had come out to grab something from the kitchen. From my left side, I saw a tall figure walking toward me. At first, I assumed it was my second oldest brother, Chris. He was the taller of the two, standing about 5'11", and the way the figure moved seemed like him. I could hear the weight of the steps, steady and deliberate. Without looking up right away, I called out to him, still laughing from something I had just watched on TV. "Chris, check this out." But as I turned fully to look, I froze. It wasn't Chris. It wasn't even human. Standing just 9 feet away from me was a tall, pitch-black shadow figure. It was completely solid, three-dimensional, but with no features, no eyes, no face, no clothing details. It was just a void, an outline of a person. Except for one thing. Sitting high on top of its head was a white ball cap. I knew that cap immediately. It was Ron's white 49ers hat. The room wasn't completely dark, but somehow, this figure was darker than the darkness itself. It was too tall to be either of my brothers. I stared at it, heart pounding, but not with fear, just a deep, sinking realization. I hesitated before speaking again. "Chris?" Nothing. The figure didn't move. Then it hit me. "Ron?" The moment I said his name, the figure turned. Slowly, deliberately, and without hesitation, it walked straight to the patio doors. The glass doors were closed and locked. The section it approached wasn't even designed to open, but that didn't matter. Without stopping, without making a sound, the shadowy figure walked straight through the curtains and passed directly through the glass. And then it was gone. I sat there stunned, trying to process what had just happened. I wasn't scared. I should have been, but I wasn't. I knew it was Ron. I could feel it. There was a deep sadness about him, a feeling of unfinished business. I think he came back for his hat. Later that night, I told my oldest brother what had happened. He didn't seem surprised. He told me that earlier that same day, he had seen something too, but he didn't want to give me the details. He just knew Ron had been there. Strangely, even though Ron appeared wearing his beloved 49ers cap, the actual hat still remained in my brother's possession. He still has it somewhere to this day. I've always wondered if Ron ever found peace after that. I hope he did. What do you think? Have you ever had an experience like this? My wife and I, along with our 6 children, hers, mine, and ours, have been living in a home in the Sacramento area for 2 years now. The house was brand new when we moved in, part of a new development with no history attached to it. But of course, there's always history tied to the land a house is built on. Less than a year into living here, my wife and I started noticing something strange. At first, it was just small things, quick glimpses of movement, like someone peeking around a corner in a neighboring room. It looked like a person tilting their head out, watching us. With 6 kids in the house, we assumed they were just playing a game of I Spy and messing with us. So naturally, I'd call out to them or run into the next room expecting to catch one of them in the act. But there was never anyone there. At first, we brushed it off, but then it kept happening, again and again. And then it started happening when the kids weren't even home. My wife and I would both see the exact same thing at the same time. A figure peeking at us from the next room, only to vanish the second we turned our heads. After a while, it escalated. I started seeing something completely different. I would walk into a room and for a split second, I would see a shadowy black figure crouching or crawling on the floor. It startled me, but for some reason, it never sent me into full panic mode. Every time I saw it, it disappeared almost instantly. It wasn't a standing, human-shaped figure like the ones that peered around corners. These were different. They were low to the ground, as if crawling or hunched over. My immediate reaction was that it looked like someone hiding under a black blanket, creeping along the floor. Things got even stranger when I casually brought up the topic with my 10-year-old daughter. I didn't give her any details, no hints, no coaching. I simply asked, "Have you ever seen something out of the corner of your eye?" She hesitated for a second before saying, "Well, I didn't want to tell you and Sarah, but sometimes when I walk into a room, I see a dark figure on the floor, like it's laying or crawling." The exact thing I had been seeing. My skin went ice cold. I hadn't told anyone about this, and yet here was my daughter, describing the same thing in her own words. Then my 9-year-old son chimed in. He said he had walked into his brother's room one day and saw what he thought was a blue blanket sliding across the floor. When he blinked, it was gone. That immediately reminded me of my own gut feeling, the sense that whatever I was seeing was like a dark sheet draped over something, moving across the room. My wife has had her own experiences too. She has seen shadowy figures in our master closet and in different rooms throughout the house. It's not just us either. Earlier this year, we went on a cruise to Alaska, and my in-laws stayed at the house for a week to watch the kids. When we got back, my mother-in-law admitted something unsettling. She said that every time she did the dishes or cleaned at the kitchen sink, she would feel like something was watching her. She'd glance up, and through the large plant on the counter, she would see a shadowy figure standing there. The moment she turned to look at it, it was gone. She had no idea about what we had seen, and yet she described the same experience. I have seen it too, something lurking behind the couch in the family room while I was doing the dishes. It was clear enough that I swore it was my 6-year-old playing around. I even called out to him, expecting him to pop up laughing. But when I went to check, there was no one there. Looking back, we started to remember something that hadn't seemed strange at the time. When our baby was only a few months old, he would look up at the corners of the room and wave. Sometimes he would even say hi, but there was nothing there. At least nothing that we could see. Strangely enough, our dog and other pets have never reacted to anything unusual. It's just us. We've decided to have a paranormal investigation team come to our house soon. They're just as intrigued as we are, especially since we have 3 adults and 2 children all witnessing the same things. I can't wait to see what they find. We're not scared, not really, but we are incredibly curious. We just want to know what it is and why it's here. Since all this started happening, I've become obsessed with researching the paranormal. Books, blogs, websites, TV shows. I never thought I'd be one of those people, but after everything we've experienced, I can't stop wondering. What are we actually seeing? What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It happened about 8 years ago on a cool evening as summer was giving way to fall. My parents and I were feeling restless, not in the mood for television, so my mom, knowing how much I loved ghost stories, suggested we take a drive through the Castro Valley Hills. She had grown up hearing a tale about a woman known as the White Witch. She told us the legend as we drove, the windows cracked open to let in the crisp night air. The scent of trees filled the car, the quiet road stretching ahead with barely another vehicle in sight. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, like the hills were holding their breath. The White Witch had nothing to do with what happened that night, but my mom's story had set the mood. Something about the darkness outside felt heavier than usual. As we climbed the narrow 2-lane highway, we saw them. A man and 2 young girls standing behind a broken-down car. The vehicle was packed to the brim, like they had crammed all their belongings into that one small space. The sight was unsettling, not just because they were stranded, but because something about them felt off. My dad pulled onto the gravel shoulder across from them. The man stood protectively with his daughters, his face filled with worry. My dad rolled down the window and asked if he needed help. "Yes, please. My car ran out of gas, and I don't want to leave my daughters alone out here." His voice was polite, but there was something strange about the way he said it, almost rehearsed. His daughters clung to him silently, their eyes reflecting our headlights. My mom's heart broke for them. She and my dad offered to go back down the hill and bring back some gas. The man looked grateful, pressing a $5 bill into my dad's hand. My dad promised we'd be back soon. As we pulled away, I glanced at them one last time in the headlights. Their silhouettes against the darkness felt unreal, almost too still. The gravel around their car looked untouched, as if the vehicle had simply appeared there. It took less than 5 minutes to get to the gas station at the bottom of the hill. We filled a small container with gas, and I picked up 2 candy bars for the little girls. We didn't waste any time, eager to help them get back on the road. But when we returned to the spot where we had left them, they were gone. Not just gone, erased. There was no car, no man, no little girls. The gravel where their vehicle had been was smooth, untouched. There were no tire tracks, not from their car, not from ours. My dad slowed the car, his hands gripping the wheel tighter. We all looked around, expecting to see headlights in the distance or movement in the trees. Nothing. There was no way they could have driven off without us seeing them. The only way down was the same way we had gone, and we would have passed them. If they had somehow coasted down the hill, they would have had to roll right past the gas station, but we had seen no sign of them. My dad kept driving up the road just in case they had somehow restarted their car and moved up the hill. No sign of them. We turned around and drove back down, checking every turnout, every shoulder. Still nothing. It was like they had never existed. We sat there for a moment, staring at the empty road, at the smooth gravel where the car should have left tracks. The jug of gas sat on the floor by my feet, the candy bars still in my lap. I whispered, "They were right here." No one spoke for a long moment. Then my mom, in a quiet voice, said what we were all thinking. "I don't think they were real." A chill ran through me. The memory of the way they had looked in the headlights, the eerie stillness, the untouched ground. It all made sense now. We drove up the hill one more time, hoping to prove ourselves wrong, but the road stretched out empty ahead, leading to a dead end. There was no sign that anyone had ever been there. We never found an explanation. The next morning, my dad still had the $5 bill the man had given him. He unfolded it, staring at it like it might disappear in his hands. It looked old, crumpled, the ink faded. Something had happened that night, something none of us could explain. To this day, I still wonder, who were they? Were they reliving a moment in time, replaying a desperate night over and over again? Did they ever make it out of those hills? Or were they always meant to disappear? It all started when I was 9. I was half asleep when a small noise woke me up. It was faint, almost like white noise, but enough to make me sit up in bed. I listened carefully and heard it again. I wasn't afraid, just a little nervous, curious. I turned toward the wall where the sound had come from and noticed something dark in the corner. A little girl. She was sobbing softly. At first, I thought it was my younger sister, but when I turned to check, she was sound asleep right next to me. That's when the fear hit me. I didn't know what to do. The last thing I wanted was to leave my bed, so I turned over, pulled the blanket over my head, and forced myself to sleep. An hour later, I woke up to the same sound. The next experience happened in the bathroom a few weeks later. I had been washing my feet, sitting on a small stool near the bathtub. I liked walking around barefoot, so it was part of my routine. But that night, as I lathered up my feet, I felt something strange, like I was being watched. It wasn't just a feeling of being observed, but something deeper, something unsettling. I glanced around the bathroom. Nothing seemed out of place, but when I turned toward the small square window near the corner of the room, my stomach dropped. There was an eye staring back at me. Not just an eye, half of a face. It was dark, but I could clearly make out that eye watching me. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment, I couldn't move. Then, without thinking, I ran, nearly slipping on the soapy floor. I sprinted to my mom, breathless, but when I told her what I had seen, she didn't believe me. The next day, the same thing happened. This time, I was using the bathroom, and again, that awful feeling crept over me. I knew where to look, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to see it again, but I couldn't stop myself. I turned toward the window. The eye was still there. I bolted out of the bathroom and straight into my dad. He looked at me puzzled. "Why are you running?" "There's a man staring at me through the window. It's the second time this has happened." My dad didn't hesitate. He grabbed a flashlight and headed outside to check. I followed, though I wasn't sure I wanted to see what he might find. When he shined the light into the narrow space behind the house, where the window faced, there was nothing. Not a single footprint. No signs that anyone had ever been there. That's when I knew. It wasn't a man. It wasn't human. Years passed. We moved houses many times, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. It wasn't long before things started disappearing. Small objects would go missing, only to show up later in odd places. I would hear soft noises in the kitchen at night when I knew no one was in there. At first, I thought it was just me noticing things more than usual. Then my mom had her own encounter. One afternoon, she was sweeping the floor while we sat in the living room watching TV. She finished cleaning and headed toward the bathroom. The moment she opened the door, it slammed shut. She spun around, thinking one of us had done it, but when she looked at us, we were all staring at her from across the room. None of us had moved. She walked back to the couch and sat down pale. That was the moment she knew something was in the house. A few months later, we were getting ready to visit my grandmother's house. Before we left, we made sure to turn everything off. We knew we'd be gone for hours. After a big family dinner, we returned home late that night. As we walked inside, a strange whirring sound came from the kitchen. My dad walked in first. The blender was on. None of us had left it plugged in. My dad touched the motor. It was freezing cold. If it had been running all day, it would have been warm. But it wasn't. It was like it had just turned on by itself. Then there was Mexico. On March 6th, my mom and I traveled there because my grandmother had fallen ill. She passed away in her sleep, and we stayed in her old room. That first night at 2 a.m., I woke up to scratching on the window. It sounded like thick fingernails scraping against the glass. I didn't want to look, so I turned away and forced myself to sleep. The next night it happened again, but this time it was worse. I lay in bed, wide awake, listening to the sound. My mom whispered, "Diana, are you awake?" "Yes," I whispered back. "Did you hear that?" "Yes." My heart was pounding. I tried to tell myself it was just mice, but my mom's voice was steady when she said, "There are no mice here." We didn't speak about it again. When we returned home, more things happened. My mom took a nap one afternoon, and it was cold in the house. She woke up to find her blanket being pulled up over her, as if someone was tucking her in. She assumed it was one of us, but when she got up, no one had been in the room. I kept moving houses, staying with different family members, but strange things followed me wherever I went. Doors would slam shut when I left a room. I'd hear footsteps in the kitchen at night. One night, at 3 a.m., I was sleeping on the couch when I woke to the sound of heels clicking against the floor. They walked toward me, then stopped. I held my breath. I never heard them walk away. Eventually, we moved again. I had my own room this time. One night, while taking pictures, I later found 3 orbs hovering above my face in the developed images. I showed my mom, but she refused to believe me. Then I started hearing footsteps in the attic. I hadn't even known we had an attic until I checked. From that night on, I locked my bedroom door every night. Still, my mom dismissed everything, until she saw it herself. She had been cooking in the kitchen while my little brother was in the shower. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a small figure peeking out from the hallway. A little boy. When she turned toward him, he darted into my room. Confused, she walked to the bathroom and checked. My little brother was still in the shower. She finally believed me. Things still happen in my home, but I've learned to live with it. The whispering, the footsteps, the cold touches, they don't scare me anymore. I don't think this thing wants to hurt me. It's just there watching. And I don't think it's going anywhere. It happened 7 years ago during a difficult time in my life, which I believe made me more open to the experience. It was early November, around 7 p.m. in Hayward, California. The sky had already gone dark, and I was home alone in the house I shared with my sister and her husband. I had settled into my room, playing a game on my computer. The house was completely dark, except for the soft glow from my monitor. I wasn't particularly focused on the game, just enough to keep my mind occupied, when I heard something from the kitchen. A metallic clatter. It sounded like a piece of silverware falling into the sink. I paused. The noise had been distinct, sharp, a single metallic clang that echoed through the quiet house. Thinking one of the dishes had slipped, I got up to check. When I reached the kitchen, I found everything exactly as it had been, the clean silverware sitting neatly in the strainer, untouched. I glanced into the sink, empty. Even checked the garbage disposal, nothing. I told myself I must have imagined it. Maybe I had been too lost in my thoughts. Shrugging it off, I turned back toward my room. As I approached, I froze. My bedroom door was shut. I hadn't closed it. Then, right as I stood there, something smacked against the door from the inside. A solid thud, like something had been thrown. I felt my stomach twist. The logical part of my brain kicked in. I have a home intruder. Without thinking, I hurried to the living room, grabbed my firearm from its hiding spot, and returned to my door. My heart was pounding in my chest as I slowly pushed it open. My father's cane was lying at the base of the door. That cane had been tucked away in my closet for years, never moved, never touched. And now it was out, in the middle of the floor, as if something had thrown it. I barely had time to react before another sound came from the kitchen. All the silverware clattering into the sink at once. I jumped. My mind raced. Someone had to be in the house with me. There was no way this was happening on its own. With my heart hammering in my chest, I went through the entire house, checking every room. The front door was locked. The back door was locked. Windows were closed. No one was there. I put my gun away, though my hands were still shaking. At this point, I was convinced something was messing with me. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something I could explain. Still rattled, I returned to the kitchen to clean up the silverware. But when I got there, the silverware was still in the strainer, untouched. The sound had been so real, so loud. I had heard it twice now, but nothing had moved. That's when the air changed. I can't explain it, but it felt like the atmosphere in the room shifted. My skin went cold, and a feeling of dread crawled up my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It felt like the air was being squeezed from my lungs, like something heavy was pressing against my chest. Then suddenly, it was in my head. A presence, a pressure, like something was trying to push into my consciousness. I struggled to move, to think clearly. Every instinct in me screamed that this was wrong, that I had to fight back. I forced myself to speak, my voice shaky but determined. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The words of Psalm 23 barely escaped my lips when I heard a hiss, not out loud, but inside my head. Then, across the room, the lid of my laundry basket suddenly popped open, standing upright for a second before slamming shut with force. And just like that, the air cleared. I gasped, suddenly able to breathe normally again. The room no longer felt wrong, no longer carried that crushing weight. I didn't stay in the house much longer after that. I turned on every light and stepped outside to clear my head. A friend came over later that night, and I told her what had happened. She believed me. She even suggested that whatever I had encountered was demonic. Maybe she was right. I don't scare easily, but that night left me shaken to my core. To this day, I still wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't started praying? Strange things have been happening to me for as long as I can remember. Most of the time, when people talk about the paranormal, it's in small towns, isolated forests, or abandoned houses, places that already carry a certain kind of emptiness. But here in Los Angeles, It's not the ghosts people usually worry about. It's the living. The house I live in isn't run down, but it's old, built in 1956. Most nights when I'm alone, I hear footsteps. Not the kind you can dismiss as the house settling. Boots. For a while, I had practically stopped living there. I was spending most nights at my girlfriend's place. Then, one night, I came home around midnight. I hadn't slept there in over a month. I was exhausted, so I went straight to bed. At some point, I woke up. The room was glowing. It was a strange, bright blue light, not coming from any one place, but from everywhere at once. Even my alarm clock's red LED numbers had turned blue. I was still half asleep, trying to understand what I was seeing, when I felt her. Someone was next to me. A woman. She was breathing. I could feel the soft rise and fall of her chest, the warmth of her skin. I was facing away from her, but I could feel her body against mine, like someone who had been laying there for a while. Her breath touched my back, slow and warm. Her hand moved onto my waist. At first, I thought it was my girlfriend, but then, in a cold rush of realization, I remembered where I was. I was at my parents' house. I glanced across the room and saw my brother asleep in his bed. That's when the dread hit me full force. I tried not to move. I told myself I was imagining it, that I had to be dreaming. But then, she shifted closer. I could feel the sweat on her skin, the heat of her body against mine. That was it. I jumped out of bed, grabbing my bedpost like a bat. At the exact same moment, my brother bolted upright. We fumbled for the light, flicking it on. The room was empty. But the bed, the place where she had been laying, was still warm. I stood there, my heart pounding, feeling the damp sweat on my back from where her skin had touched mine. Neither of us slept much after that. Over the years, I started recognizing a pattern. Whenever something strange happened, I would see the blue light, and sometimes the blue light came before something worse. A few times I woke up in the middle of the night, my room bathed in that same eerie glow. A minute later, the phone would ring, bringing bad news. Someone had died. A friend, a family member. It happened so often that I had the phone removed from my room. I couldn't stand it anymore. The waiting. There's one more thing. Something that still happens. The black dog. Some nights, I hear paws on the concrete outside my house. The steady, rhythmic sound of something walking. If I look out the window, I see it. A large black dog standing motionless in the dark. But when I check outside, nothing. And then, without fail, the next day, someone in my family dies. It always happens in winter. If anyone else has experienced the blue light, an uninvited bedfellow, or the black dog, let me know. Because this has been happening all my life. And I don't think it's going to stop. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. In 1974, when I was 6, we moved from West Germany to Gretna, Nebraska. The house was brand new, and we were the first to live in it. I shared a room with my older sister, Kelly. There wasn't much in our room yet, just our bunk beds and a few scattered belongings. That first night as we were settling in, something strange happened. The closet door, the kind that slides on a track, kept opening on its own. At first, I thought Kelly was doing it to scare me, but there was no way. She would have had to go in front of me to reach the door, and I never saw her move. After a while, we got so freaked out that we called for our dad. He came in, checked the door, and shut it firmly. After that, it stayed closed, for that night at least. As we grew up in that house, we often heard footsteps moving up and down the hallway and the stairs, even when no one was there. Sometimes it sounded like heavy boots, sometimes like soft, careful steps. We learned to live with it. There was something else too. The patterns of the wood on the bedroom and bathroom doors had outlines of faces. One looked like a Native American man, with long hair draped over his shoulders. The other looked like a goat's head, with visible horns and sharp features. It wasn't just me who saw them. Whenever I pointed them out to people, they saw them too. Things got even stranger after Kelly moved out, leaving me alone in the room. One time, I was in the bathroom doing a makeup job on my best friend, Chris. I was taking pictures at every step to show her transformation. Every photo came out fine, except one. It was completely blurred, as if whatever was in it had been erased. If you turned it one way, it looked like a skeleton head. If you turned it another way, it looked like a dark tunnel leading somewhere unknown. I showed it to others before it was lost, and everyone agreed it was unsettling. Another time, I was curling my hair in the bathroom. The long mirror above the sink faced the bathtub, reflecting most of the room. As I stood there, concentrating, I heard someone whisper my nickname, Dinky. It came from right behind me. Startled, I spun around, expecting to see someone there, but I was completely alone. Then there was the night we played with the Ouija board in front of the fireplace. It started moving as expected, gliding from letter to letter. Then it spelled out the word op. None of us knew what it meant. The board claimed to be a little boy who had died young, but we couldn't get much else out of him. Just as we decided to put the board away, 2 black crickets crawled across the floor toward us. They weren't chirping, they weren't hopping, they were just walking. One of the guys I was with grabbed his shoe and squashed one of them. The other one took off, but when we looked, we couldn't find the one he had hit. It was just gone. Later, I told my mom about it, and she froze. Her great-grandfather had lived in Opp, Alabama, and had a son who died before he was a year old. That name wasn't random. It meant something. But the most unsettling experience happened just after I finished high school. My half-brother and his girlfriend were staying with us. There had always been tension in our family, but something about them being there made me uneasy. I started having this growing fear that my half-brother wanted to hurt us. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I told Kelly about it, and she gave me a stiletto knife for protection, just in case. That night, I could feel the tension in the air. Something was going to happen. I was sure of it. I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Every small noise jolted me awake. After a while, exhaustion took over, and I finally drifted off. It must have been early morning, around 7, when I felt it. A hand on my left shoulder. It wasn't rough or aggressive. It was warm, reassuring, like someone trying to tell me, "It's okay. You're safe." For a moment, fear shot through me, but then I realized it wasn't frightening. It was comforting. Later, I told another sister about it. She said maybe it was Jesus comforting me. I don't know if that's true, but I do know that after that, my half-brother and his girlfriend moved out a few weeks later, and the house felt peaceful again. Most people would think living in a house like this would be terrifying, but I never felt that way. I always felt safe, like something, or someone, was watching over me. Now, I live in an apartment complex in Colorado, and I don't have that feeling anymore. I wish I did. I still don't understand everything that happened in that house. Maybe I never will, but part of me misses it. The strange, unexplainable moments, the feeling of knowing I wasn't alone. I wouldn't say I have any special gift, but every now and then, I've sensed things, something just being there. I believe most people have had that feeling at some point, an unshakable awareness that they aren't alone. But what happened to me that night wasn't just a feeling. It was real. At the time, I was living with my then boyfriend, 80, and his best friend, Sean, in a 2-bedroom terrace house in West Yorkshire. We had only moved in the day before. That first Sunday night, 80, Sean, and a friend named James went out drinking, leaving me and Sean's girlfriend behind to watch TV. When they stumbled back in, James was too drunk to drive home, so we let him crash on the sofa. The next morning, everything changed. I woke abruptly to my alarm blaring, pulling me from deep sleep. As I sat up, still groggy, the door to my bedroom creaked open. In the dim light, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. A dark shadow. My first thought was that it was seeing, maybe coming to wake me up. I called out, "What's up?" expecting a response. Nothing. That's when I realized it couldn't be him. The figure was too large. Seeing was slight, and this shadowy form was broad, looming. And besides, Seeing was an impossibly heavy sleeper. He wouldn't be up yet. A slow wave of fear crept over me. My heart pounded as I reached toward the other side of the bed, searching for Eddie. He wasn't there. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The figure stood there, motionless, watching. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the dark, that maybe my eyes were still adjusting. But then it moved, not like a person stepping out of sight, but in a way that felt unnatural. It melted into the darkness. It was gone. I sat frozen in place until I heard footsteps on the stairs. Moments later, Eddie walked into the room, flicking on the light. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. His face changed as he looked at me. "You're pale as death." I could barely speak. "Where were you?" My voice was barely a whisper. "I went downstairs for water," he said, still staring at me, concern etched on his face. "Was James awake?" I asked. "Was anyone upstairs?" Eddie shook his head. "No, James is out cold. If he'd had left the sofa, I'd have seen him on the stairs." I told him everything. He checked on Sean, still fast asleep. The house was silent, empty, but I knew what I had seen. For months, I tried to push it to the back of my mind. Maybe I had been half dreaming. Maybe it was just my imagination. But something about that house was wrong. I never felt comfortable there, like I was intruding in someone else's space. Whenever I was home alone, I had to keep the lights on, even while I slept. I've always been a little afraid of the dark, but never like that. It wasn't just me. The house was full of tension, as if something unseen was pushing us all to the edge. Eddie and I argued constantly. It wasn't like us. We eventually broke up in that house, though strangely, we remained friends afterward. Sean fought with his girlfriend all the time. Even she and I, who had always gotten along, had one massive falling out. It was like the place fed off discord. Years later, I talked to others who had stayed there. Without prompting, most admitted they'd felt uneasy too, like they didn't belong, like something didn't want them there. That shadow, whatever it wasn't just a passing trick of the light. It wasn't a dream. It was there, watching me, and I have no idea why. Even now, when I think about it, I feel a chill settle over me, and every hair on my body stands on end. I've always believed in the supernatural. It's not something I chose. It's something that chose me. Over the years, I've had so many experiences that I hardly know where to begin. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that some places hold on to things that refuse to be ignored. There's a room in my house that no one can sleep in. No matter who stays there, they don't last the night. I've had friends sleep over, people who knew nothing about the house or its history. Without fail, they'd come running to my room in the middle of the night, shaken, pale, unable to explain what they had felt. I've tried to sleep there myself. I lasted 5 minutes. That was enough. And then there was the night we remodeled my room. It started out normal. We were just painting, moving furniture, nothing unusual. That's when I noticed it. A thin stream of liquid seeping from the wall. It was pale red, almost pink. At first, I thought it was paint, but it wasn't. It kept coming faster than I could wipe it away. My dad was with me that night. He's a carpenter, a man who has seen his share of strange things in old houses. But this stopped him cold. There were no pipes in that wall, no water lines, nothing that could explain it. It wasn't just the room. It wasn't just the walls. Whatever this thing was, it had made itself known in every corner of my childhood. I remember being chased around the house as a child, not by something I could see, only by the sound of footsteps, by the rush of wind, by something breathing just behind me. I would run, heart pounding, knowing I couldn't see it but still terrified that, at any moment, I might. My parents, They never wanted to talk about it, but even they couldn't deny the strange things that happened. One night, the sound of an organ playing echoed through the house, waking everyone. My parents dismissed it, told us it must have been the radio, but we all knew the truth. And then there were the times when people doubted. Whenever someone openly claimed they didn't believe in ghosts, something would happen. Objects would fly across the room. Banisters would shake. It was as if the house was listening, waiting for someone to challenge it. As I got older, the activity slowed, but it never truly stopped. It just moved. When my sister had a baby, the presence seemed to shift to her house, but only when the child wasn't there. Toys would turn on by themselves. Rocking chairs would move. Footsteps would echo through empty hallways. Her boyfriend, once a complete skeptic, became a believer within weeks of moving in. He didn't talk about it much, but he didn't deny it either. And it wasn't just eerie. It was dangerous. There were times when the house felt like it was on the verge of chaos, moments when fear turned to hysteria. My parents still refused to acknowledge what was happening, yet they admitted they believed in ghosts. We gave it a name, Henry, but deep down, I always felt there was more than one. Maybe it had something to do with the land. We live on old Native American grounds, where we still find arrowheads in the soil. Or maybe it was something else entirely. I still remember the woman I saw when I was little. I had rolled over in bed one night and found her standing beside me, just watching. I squeezed my eyes shut, turned my back, pretended she wasn't there. But that never works. They don't like to be ignored. She leaned over me, closer, hovering. I never told my parents about her. Even outside my home, strange things seemed to follow me. There was a cemetery near town, a place where, months before a murder took place, my friends and I had been messing around late at night. That was when I heard it. Hey, it was loud. Close. At first, I thought we'd been caught, that a game warden or someone had found us. But when I turned, I saw something. A dark figure, floating just beyond the trees. I grabbed my friend's arm, shaking him. He had heard it too. We ran. Months later, we took a wrong turn and ended up back on that road. That's when we saw them. Bright blue lights, shapes moving in the dark. We didn't stay to find out what they were. I still don't know what to make of all this. I used to think I was crazy, that maybe I was imagining things. But it keeps happening. To me, to my sister. And I know now, something is trying to communicate. I just wish I knew what. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? I've had experiences with spirits before, growing up, but nothing that ever terrified me to my core, nothing that made me flee in the middle of the night, leaving everything behind. It happened twice. Once, I ran out barefoot in nothing but my nightclothes, pregnant, clutching nothing but my fear. The second time, I had my twin daughters in my arms, my Bible clutched tightly in my hand. I left everything behind both times. I never went back. The first encounter happened when I was just 15 years old, married, and pregnant. I had just moved into a small white-framed house. My landlord was my father's coworker, a family friend, and oddly enough, he lived right next door. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just little things that I tried to explain away. It started with the chicken. Every time I cooked chicken, it would turn out bright yellow. I had been cooking since I was 4 years old for a family of 5, so I knew it wasn't my cooking. Something was wrong with the stove, I thought. One day, I tried baking it in the oven to see if that would make a difference. When I pulled it out, the yellow was gone, but the chicken was now green. I threw it away. We ate out that night. The real horror started in the early hours of the morning. Every night, I would wake up to an eerie cold draft sweeping over me. I'd shiver, sit up, and find all 4 bedroom windows wide open. Every single one. I would shake my husband awake and ask if he had opened them. He always said no. At first, I wasn't convinced. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he did it in his sleep. So I stayed up one night watching. Hours passed. the room silent except for the sound of my own breathing. Then, one by one, the windows flung open by themselves. I couldn't move. My breath hitched in my throat as I watched the curtains whip and billow as if caught in a violent windstorm. Something about the air in that room felt heavy, dark, wrong. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread creeping into my mind. Thoughts that weren't my own. Suicidal thoughts, whispering like echoes in my head. I couldn't stay in that room. I grabbed my husband's arm, begged him to come sleep in the living room with me. We closed the bedroom door behind us. Then came the worst night of my life. We were watching TV, trying to shake off the unease, when I felt it. A hard kick. Then another. Both my unborn twins kicking at the same time, as if something had startled them. Before I could process what was happening, we heard it. A loud bang. The bedroom windows had slammed open all at once. A wind roared through the house, strong enough to make the curtains whip like flags in a storm. The air was ice cold, pressing against my skin. Something was in that house with us, and it was angry. The nursery door stood open, just down the hall. A deep, sickening fear settled over me as I crawled toward it, unable to stand. The closer I got, the heavier the air became, like something was physically pressing down on me. Then I saw it. The baby Swain in the nursery was moving. At first, a slow, steady rhythm, then faster, and faster, and faster. And sitting inside it was the rabbit. It was just a stuffed rabbit with purple ears and red eyes, something I had never thought twice about before. But now, its eyes glowed in the darkness, burning like embers. The Swain jerked wildly, as if unseen hands were pushing it harder and harder. I wanted to run. I couldn't. My body refused to move, frozen in terror. I was locked in place, unable to blink, unable to breathe. I felt it. I felt something in that room with me. My husband, who had hesitated at the doorway, finally made his way in. He dropped to his knees beside me, shaking just as violently as I was. He had crawled in too terrified to stand. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining this. It wasn't just in my head. We finally broke free from whatever held us in place. We trampled over each other in our desperate attempt to escape. We ran outside, slamming the door behind us. We never stepped foot in that house again. The next morning our preacher came to cleanse the house, but it would take an army to get me to go back in there. A friend who had watched my cat while I was away later told me that she too had been terrified while staying in the house. She never told me what she saw, only that she ran out and vowed never to return. The house still sits vacant to this day. My second encounter happened years later. I was living in a 2-story townhouse with my husband and 2 of his friends. One of them, Douglas, brought with him a stuffed monkey that I absolutely hated. I've never liked dolls or stuffed animals that looked too real. They always made me uneasy. But this monkey, it seemed to move. No matter where I went in the house, I'd find it there, staring at me. At first, I chalked it up to Douglas messing with me, until things got worse. One night, I heard Douglas shouting at me to go back to bed. Confused, I opened my bedroom door. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, his face white as a ghost. He told me the next morning that he had seen me, or something that looked like me. A figure identical to me had stepped out of my bedroom, looked directly at him, and started walking down the stairs. When he called out, the figure vanished, and that was the exact moment I had opened my door for real. Strange things started happening after that. Lights would flicker, glowing an unnatural purple before burning out. Shadows would move in the corners of our vision. My husband refused to believe it, until one night of sheer terror changed everything. It started with a gas leak. Douglas and I found gas spilled all over the laundry room floor, but the moment I went to grab a mop, the door locked from the inside. I was trapped. The smell was overwhelming, making me dizzy and sick. I collapsed, struggling to breathe. I woke up in the emergency room. That night, we realized what had been in that house was something far worse than a spirit. It was something that wanted us gone. The final straw was when Douglas was attacked. He was sitting in the dining room when an invisible force threw him violently to the floor, his body pinned in place. He couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't scream. When he finally broke free, he whispered in terror. It told me, "You are mine. You always will be." That was it. I grabbed my daughters, my Bible, and we ran. I've never gone back. Even now, I wonder, what happened to that house? What happened to them? And most of all, what would have happened if we had stayed? Have you ever experienced something like this? Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I was 8 years old, my family moved into a small house in Huntington Beach, California. We had moved around quite a bit, but something about this house felt different from the start. I didn't like it. It was cheaply built, cramped, and sat in a neighborhood that backed up to the alley behind a Kmart. It wasn't a bad area, just a little rundown. My mother later told me she was surprised by how unsettled I was. I had always been independent, never afraid to sleep alone. But in that house, I refused. I couldn't explain it, only that I felt safer sleeping in her bed. At first, everything seemed fine. A few months passed, and then things started to change. My older brother began waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, screaming about terrible nightmares. At first, my parents thought it was just bad dreams, but the episodes kept happening. My father also started acting strangely. He would suddenly space out, losing time, sometimes collapsing into sleep with no warning. Then my mother decided I needed to start sleeping in my own room. That's when things got worse. Every night, I saw him. A tall man rummaging through my closet, moving frantically, as if he were searching for something. He always had a small kitchen knife clutched in his hand. I would scream, and my mother would rush in, but she never saw anything. She would comfort me, telling me it was just a bad dream. One night, she had had enough. Determined to prove that nothing was there, she marched over to my closet and grabbed the doorknob. She screamed. The moment her hand touched it, she yanked it away, clutching her palm in pain. Without another word, she ran to the bathroom. I didn't understand what had happened at the time, but years later, she told me the truth. The doorknob had been red hot. After that night, something even stranger started happening. Every night, without fail, my alarm clock would go off at a late hour. It didn't matter what time I had set it for. It would blare at full volume, jolting me awake in terror. My parents tried adjusting it, but nothing worked. What was even stranger was that it still went off at its regular time every morning at 7 o'clock, as if nothing had changed. Frustrated, my parents eventually removed it from my room entirely. And just like that, the strange nighttime alarms stopped. Then we started finding the dead animals. Birds, possums, even rats, though no one else in the neighborhood ever complained about rats in their homes. They appeared in our backyard, lifeless and untouched, almost as if something, or someone, had placed them there. My mother became uneasy. She kept telling my father that she had seen an old woman wandering through our backyard. Sometimes she was hunched over, digging through our garbage. Other times she would tap on our windows. My father dismissed it, saying her imagination was getting the best of her. Maybe she was just searching for an explanation for the dead animals. But my mother was convinced. And then I stopped sleeping. It wasn't that I was afraid. I just stayed awake. I would walk around the house at night, pacing from room to room. My mother later insisted I must have been sleepwalking because she never saw me sleep during the day. But I remember everything. I was awake, fully awake. We eventually moved when my father got an offer on a bigger house, closer to the ocean. He never questioned any of it, never looked back. But my mother and I, we still think something was wrong with that house. Have you ever experienced something like this? In 1995, my friend Dawn and I moved into a house in the Oakland Hills, a place that had been among the casualties of the Great Firestorm of 1991 in the Berkeley/Oakland Hills. While there were no official reports of deaths in the fire, rumors always seem to linger, and when you live in a place that has witnessed such devastation, it's hard not to feel the weight of its history. The house had been rebuilt, but traces of the past were still evident. The structure had been severely damaged in the fire, and the land itself carried a strange energy. Dawn's room had a loft where we often crashed for the night, and as we settled in, we'd hear the usual creaks and groans of a house still adjusting to recent construction. That part didn't bother us. What did was what came after the silence. It always began the same way. Just as we would stop talking, a new set of sounds would take over. At first, we thought it was just our minds playing tricks on us. Maybe it was traffic from the road or voices from distant neighbors. But that theory didn't hold. The house was surrounded by vacant lots, most of them still for sale, and the hills were eerily quiet at night. There were no people nearby, no cars passing in the late hours. Yet we heard voices. They started faintly, as if carried by the wind, but the more we listened, the clearer they became. At times, they shouted instructions, urgent and panicked. Other times, there was crying, raw and broken. There were shrieks of fear, sobs of pain, and between them, a strange, unsettling murmuring, babbling voices, scattered and unintelligible. At first, we kept it to ourselves, too afraid to acknowledge it. Each of us thought we were imagining things, that maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on us. Neither of us wanted to be the first to admit what we were hearing. But one night, the truth came out. A group of our friends had gathered in the living room, and somehow, the conversation turned to the paranormal. Dawn couldn't hold it in any longer. She admitted that she had been hearing the voices for weeks. My heart dropped. I had been hearing them too. I wasn't losing my mind. More of our friends joined in. Some had stayed in the loft and experienced the same thing. The cries, the shouting, the whispers. None of us had talked about it before, but now, sitting there in the dimly lit room, it was impossible to ignore. The voices followed a pattern. They would begin around dusk, growing louder as the night deepened, peaking in intensity between 3 and 4 in the morning. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, they would vanish, only to start again the following evening. Dawn and I could never settle on an explanation. I had a theory that we were experiencing some kind of time loop, a fragment of history playing over and over again, capturing the moment of destruction, sorrow, and fear that had once consumed this place. Dawn, on the other hand, believed something even darker, that we were hearing the voices of the lost, people who may have died in the fire, unnoticed and unaccounted for. It wasn't impossible. Many homeless individuals would retreat into the cool shade of the hills during the summer months, escaping the scorching heat of the city. When the fire came, moving fast and fierce, they would have had no warning. If anyone had died that night, they would have been overlooked, their names never spoken, their bodies never found. Maybe they were still there. We never spoke to our neighbors about it. The few people who lived nearby were wealthy, detached, people who measured life in money, not in the unseen. They wouldn't have understood. They wouldn't have wanted to. We don't claim to have all the answers. We don't expect anyone to believe us. But it happened, and we were not alone. Have you ever experienced something like this? My mom moved into her house in Plattsmouth, Nebraska in 1990. It wasn't an old house, built sometime in the 1980s, so no one expected anything strange. But from the moment I moved in with her in 1991 to go to school, something about the place felt off. The unease grew when they started building an extra room for me. That's when the weird things really began. I never liked walking around that house without the lights on. There was something about the darkness, the way it felt heavier than it should. Too many times, I'd find myself looking over my shoulder, feeling as if someone was watching me. Then there were the sounds. One afternoon, I was sitting downstairs playing Nintendo when I heard someone walking down the hall above me. Slow, steady footsteps moved into the kitchen, followed by the unmistakable sound of cupboard doors opening and dishes being pulled out. I assumed my little brother was home from school. I called out to him. No answer. Then, just as clearly as before, I heard the footsteps retreating down the hall. Silence. I sat there, listening, every nerve on edge. About 10 minutes later, the exact same thing happened again. Footsteps, the sound of dishes clattering, and then nothing. That was it. I refused to go upstairs until someone else came home. But I wasn't the only one who had experiences. My mom once woke up in the middle of the night and saw someone bent over at the waist, staring down at her. She froze, trying to focus, and in an instant, he was gone. Too many things have happened in that house to explain them all. Some events were small. Objects moved when no one was around. Lights flickered for no reason. But others were impossible to ignore. I always had the sense that there were two spirits in that house. One of them liked to play. The other? It wasn't good. For the past year or so, everything has been quiet. No strange sounds. No unsettling encounters. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not truly gone. I've always wondered, what is that house built on? Is there something buried beneath it? Was something there before the land was developed? How do you find out what history a property holds, especially if it's not documented? Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? My name is Tracy Sullivan, and my experiences with the unexplained began when I was just 5 years old. Over the years, I've had more encounters than I can count, but none have ever come close to what happened to me in Southern California. The one event that was so terrifying, so violent, that it sent me running to Northern California, never looking back. At the time, I was renting a room in Reseda, K, in the house of a friend's ex-husband. I had trouble sleeping from the moment I moved in, but I chalked it up to stress. Looking back, I should have known better. Not long after moving in, I met two people who quickly became good friends, a young man named Doug and a young woman named Jill. We all had a fascination with the paranormal, frequently swapping stories about ghosts, ESP, and all things unexplained. One night, that fascination led us somewhere we never should have gone. It was a park, one I had never been to before, and one I will never return to. We drove in as far as we could, but the gate was closed, so we parked on a dead-end street and set out on foot. My friends had been there before and said there was a small stream in the center of the park. It was a moonless night, and the darkness felt endless. I walked ahead, about 15 feet in front of them, when I felt a tap on my right shoulder. I turned, expecting to see Doug, but he was too far behind me. My heart pounded as I glanced to my left. There, standing on a hill, was a figure. It looked like an American Indian scout, motionless, watching. I had no idea what I had just seen, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe the stories we told had gotten into my head. Then I saw the shadow. It moved in front of me, shifting and expanding, though there was no light source to cast it. I kept walking, still trying to convince myself it was nothing, but the shadow grew, wider, darker, closer. Then it caught me. One moment, I was stepping forward. The next, my foot never reached the ground. Something had grabbed me by the throat. Not my entire neck, just my windpipe. I couldn't breathe. My body locked up as sheer terror took hold. My mind fought to process what was happening. My friends saw it happen and came running down the hill, only to stop halfway, frozen in fear. Doug was the first to react, shouting for Jill to get the car started. Then he bolted toward me, grabbing me, dragging me toward the car, half lifting me as I gasped for air. Jill stood by the car, stunned, her face pale. And then we saw it. The symbols. They covered her car, satanic symbols drawn in the dust and dirt. Earlier, we had teased her about needing a car wash. Now, we regretted it. The symbols looked like runes, reversed mirror images of what they should have been. Doug shoved me into the car, his voice shaking as he yelled at Jill to drive. I still couldn't breathe. The moment we sped away, it was like breaking the grip of something unseen. I took my first deep, desperate breath. My memory of what happened next is blurred, but Doug and Jill later told me that I had been speaking, channeling something. I was talking about an old Indian woman, but my voice wasn't mine. It terrified them more than the attack itself. The moment we pulled over, doubt forced my hands into the clean soil, grounding me. The moment my fingers touched the earth, the channeling stopped. We drove straight to the nearest open restaurant, needing to sit, to process, to calm down. We tried convincing ourselves it hadn't been real, but when we walked back to the car, the symbols were still there. And the next morning, the truth became undeniable. Finger-shaped bruises had formed on my windpipe, not around my neck, like someone had choked me with their hands, only on my throat as if I had been lifted by my windpipe alone. That day, Doug called a friend who specialized in exorcising evil entities. When he arrived at my house, he found something strange, a patch of mud beneath my bedroom window, where nothing would grow. The landlord had no explanation. Doug's friend asked Jill and me to leave the house while they cleansed it. We drove to the store, but when we returned, we couldn't bring ourselves to get out of the car. We sat there, watching the house. Then it happened. A bright pinkish flash of light erupted above the house. Then another. We turned to each other, speechless. We had both seen it. A few moments later, the men emerged. "It's done," they told us. I asked how they could be so sure. "Did you see the flashes of light?" Doug's friend asked. Jill and I nodded. "That was her," he said. "She tried to come back, but she won't be returning." And she never did. I don't know what that shadow was. I don't know who the Indian woman was or what she wanted. But I know that something in that park, and later in my home, tried to take me. I left Southern California not long after that, and I never went back. Have you ever experienced something like this? The one who visited me one morning and pressed my head into my pillow, as if trying to wake me up. At first, I thought it was an odd way to get my attention, but looking back, maybe he knew I would have just rolled over and ignored him otherwise. That happened about 2.5 years ago, but lately, I think he's noticed me again. Maybe it's because I've been more interested in ghosts and spirits recently. When I was a kid, I sometimes had nightmares. But during a family trip to Canada, I got a dream catcher. A really nice one. I don't know if it actually worked the way dream catchers are supposed to, but back then, just having it made me feel safe. And that was enough to keep the nightmares away. It broke a few years ago, but I still keep it in a box in my room. Then, on Thursday, November 13th, 2008, I had nightmares for the first time since getting that dream catcher. The dreams didn't seem important, just random, unsettling things that didn't make much sense. When my alarm went off Friday morning, I felt awful. Even though I knew it was just a dream, I was completely drained, like I hadn't rested at all. I remembered waking up about an hour before my alarm, somewhere between two nightmares. My dad thought I must have been waking up all night, caught in a cycle of bad dreams. I told my mom about it and considered staying home. But I had a calculus test I didn't want to make up later. By the time I finished the test, though, I felt even worse. I knew I wouldn't last much longer at school. After math class, I went to the office, called my mom, and asked her to pick me up. I got home around 11 a.m. and went straight to bed. I slept for hours, finally waking up around 5:30 in the evening, feeling much better. My parents were out, but when they came back later, they asked how I was doing. Eventually, they went to bed, but since I had slept so late, I stayed up until about 3 a.m., just passing the time. When I finally decided to go to bed and finished taking a shower, my cat, Crystal, jumped up onto my bed. She's always been a shy, quiet cat, very cautious, but she loves me more than anything. When she really wants attention, she actually meows, which is rare for her. Normally, she just makes little squeaks and chirps. That night, she was extra clingy. She crawled under the blanket for warmth, kneaded at the fabric, and batted at my hands whenever I stopped petting her. Eventually, she settled into her usual spot, curled up between my arm and chest, her little nose pressed into my shoulder, purring like crazy. It was comforting. Then, I felt it. The foot of my bed sank slightly, like someone had just sat down. My eyes snapped open, but I didn't see anything. My first thought was the ghost. I couldn't tell if he had settled on the left or right side. It just felt like the whole end of the bed dipped. Crystal immediately stopped purring. She froze, then turned away from me and moved down to my hip instead. That's when I started to feel uneasy. Lying on my back, I suddenly felt exposed. I didn't want him to do what he had done last time. I reached out and placed my hand on Crystal's back, not moving anything else. She stayed completely still, not purring, not reacting at all. Then, a strange tingling feeling spread through my legs, like pins and needles, but different. It was faint at first, but it slowly crept up into my arms. For a second, I panicked, thinking he was paralyzing me again like before. But when I tested it, I realized I could still move. I shifted my knee slightly, then my arm. The feeling didn't last long. It faded after a couple of minutes. But even then, I never felt the bed rise back up. Somehow, I managed to fall asleep. And when I woke up, I felt amazing. No nightmares, no tossing and turning. Just deep, restful sleep. Crystal had moved at some point and was curled up between my feet. The moment she noticed I was awake, she stretched and climbed back into her usual spot against my chest. And then, I heard it. 2 loud knocks, quick and clear, right on the wall beside my bed, just above my desk, like someone rapping their knuckles against it. There was no one else in my room. That wall faces our side yard on the 2nd floor, and there aren't any trees close enough to cause the sound. But this time, I wasn't scared. It didn't feel like a warning or a threat. It felt like acknowledgement, like he was just letting me know he was there. A little later, I tested it. I knocked on the wall myself in the exact same spot. It was the same sound. There wasn't anything loose or hanging nearby that could have made it by accident. Looking back, it feels like he stayed with me that night, not to scare me, but to keep the nightmares away. Maybe when I woke up, he knocked on the wall to say he was leaving. I don't know why he's here or what he wants, but I do know this. I'm not afraid of him anymore. Today, I went into the backyard and quietly told him thank you. I hope he was listening, and if he ever visits again, this time, I'll be ready. I've always believed my great-grandfather has been watching over my family. He passed away in 1973 when I was just 3 years old, but we've always felt his presence. From the moment he left us, strange things started happening, things we could never fully explain. The first time my mother noticed something was different was shortly after he died. One night she woke up to the sound of music, soft, distant, and unmistakably from the 1920s. It seemed to be coming from right above her. At first, she thought it might be from a neighbor's house, but when she stuck her head out the window, the night was completely silent. As soon as she lay back down, the music returned, playing right above her again. 3 years later, when I was 6, we had moved to Florida. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night feeling uneasy. Without knowing why, I walked across the house and woke my mother. I told her I needed to use the bathroom and insisted that she take me. She did, and as she was tucking me back into bed, she suddenly felt something on the floor. Curious, she turned on the light. Lying there, right next to my bed, was my great-grandfather's Spanish-American War uniform. She asked me how it got there, but I had no idea. The uniform had been stored in a hall closet, far too high and heavy for a child my size to reach. My dad, convinced I had been sleepwalking, made me try to lift it out of the closet the next day. I couldn't even budge it. The only explanation that made sense to us. My great-grandfather had placed it there. And somehow, he had guided me to wake my mother, so she would see it too. My father also had an experience with him. During a difficult time in my parents' marriage, my dad was out driving, lost in thought. He was deeply troubled, thinking about everything that was going wrong. Then, out of nowhere, he glanced in the rearview mirror. And there he was. His grandfather's face stared back at him. Startled, my dad immediately pulled over. When he turned around, the back seat was empty. But something about that moment changed him. He felt something, like a silent message. Instead of continuing down the road, he turned the car around and went home. My sister has seen him too. Twice, she's woken up to find him standing in her doorway. As he moved closer, she panicked and screamed, and just like that, he faded away. She's also heard footsteps on the stairs when she was home alone. Once she heard the door to her room open from down the hall, but when she checked, no one was there. Then there's the cookies. When my great-grandfather was alive, my mother would bake him chocolate chip cookies. He loved them. One afternoon, about 10 years after he passed, my mom was in the kitchen baking, but this time she was making oatmeal raisin cookies instead. My sister and I were at school, my dad was at work, and the house was quiet. As she stirred the dough, she suddenly felt a hand on her shoulder. Startled, she spun around, expecting to see my dad home early, but there was no one there. She knew right then. He had been there watching, and he wasn't happy about the change in cookies. Since that day, we've only ever made chocolate chip. These things have happened in every home we've ever lived in, and we've moved 13 times. But no matter where we go, he follows. Even though I've never seen him myself, I know he's there. And I believe I have another guardian angel too. My mother once had a close friend, Mrs. Levitt, who passed away from bone cancer. Before she died, she and my mom had long talks about life, death, and what comes after. I don't know what promises they made to each other, but I believe Mrs. Levitt kept hers. Years later, I was in a terrible car accident. There were 5 of us in the car, and no one had seat belts on. The car flipped end over end 3 times before landing upside down. Not one of us had a single scratch. That same night, my mom noticed something strange. Mrs. Levitt had given her a nurse's pin before she died, a small but meaningful gift. My mom kept it in her jewelry box, but when she went to put her jewelry away that evening, the pin was missing. She searched everywhere. It was gone. Then, the phone rang. It was the call about our accident. The people who had witnessed it were sure someone had died. The emergency response was massive. Ambulances, fire trucks, everything. But we had all walked away without a single injury. That night, after we got home, my mom opened her jewelry box again. And there, back in its place, was the pin. I don't think it was a coincidence. I believe it was Mrs. Levitt's way of letting us know she had been there, watching over us, keeping us safe. Living in New England, I know plenty of people who have experienced hauntings. It's fascinating and a little scary too. But when it comes to my family, I know that whatever is with us, whether it's my great-grandfather, Mrs. Levitt, or maybe even both, they aren't here to frighten us. They're here to protect us. It's been years since I've had the same encounters with spirits as I did when I was a child. I guess as we grow up, we start to doubt the things we once believed in. I still believe, but now there's more fear mixed in with it. My experiences with spirits started when I was in 2nd grade. We had just moved into a new house, and I've always thought that every house has at least one room where spirits like to stay. In our house, that room was mine. My brother and I were finally getting our own rooms, but I couldn't sleep in mine. I told everyone that my brother was scared to sleep alone, but the truth was, it was me who was afraid. At first, I tried to sleep there. One night, I prayed to God, asking if I could see my father, who had died when my mom was 6 months pregnant with me. That night, I woke up and saw him hovering over my bed. He didn't speak out loud, but somehow, I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was proud of me. He knew I was going to do something great. After that, I refused to sleep alone. It wasn't because I thought he was bad. He wasn't. But something about that room didn't feel right. At night, I would wake up and hear strange noises coming from inside. All my things were in there, so whenever I needed something, I would run in as fast as I could and run right back out. As I got older, sharing a room with my brother became uncomfortable. so I finally decided to face my fear and sleep in my own room. I was in 5th grade by then. For a while, nothing major happened. Just little things that seemed strange. The house was fairly new, but my room creaked constantly. The TV would turn on by itself. Sometimes, I heard noises that weren't creaks at all. It was unsettling, but I managed. Then, when I turned 15, things got much worse. The noises got louder, and I started to see things. One night, I had a friend over. We were sitting on my bed, laughing and talking, when we suddenly heard a scraping sound against the window. That wouldn't have been so weird, except my room was on the 2nd floor, and there were no trees anywhere near the window. We were terrified. We bolted out of my room and spent the rest of the night in the living room. A few weeks later, I had the biggest scare of my life. Up until then, I had seen ghosts and felt their presence, but never up close. That night, I woke up and rolled over to check the time. There was a man lying in my bed. He startled me, but strangely, he didn't scare me. He was an older man with salt and pepper hair and a gray beard. He was wearing an old Confederate uniform. He just lay there, looking at me. I turned over and tried to ignore him. Eventually, he gave up and left. Even though I wasn't terrified, I slept with the lights on for a month after that. But then I realized that avoiding the problem wasn't helping. So the next day, I went into my room and spoke out loud. I told him I didn't know why he was there, but I didn't appreciate being startled like that. And it worked. I never saw him again, but I still felt him there. He started to communicate with me in other ways. He warned me about my closet. I had always kept it open because it was too full to close, but he told me I needed to shut it at night. He said that whatever had scraped at my window that night lived in the closet, and that it wasn't good. From that moment on, I knew he was protecting me. Whenever I was making a decision, he would warn me about the dangers. He saved me more than once. But as I got older, his presence started to bother me. He never gave me a moment's peace, always butting in, always watching. One day, I got so frustrated that I yelled at him. I told him to leave me alone, and he did. For 4 years, I didn't feel him at all. Then recently, I was talking to a friend online who gave me a reading. I told her about him, and she told me something I had never considered. She said that in another life, he had been my husband, that he still thought we were married. It suddenly made sense. No wonder he had left so angrily. Imagine the person you love telling you to get lost. But she also said that he had finally realized he was a ghost, that he had moved on. Shortly after, I felt him one last time. It was just a brief moment, but I knew he was there. We made peace. Since then, I haven't felt anything quite like that again. I drove through Hollywood faster than I expected and, after circling a few times, finally found a parking spot. If you've ever been near the Sunset Strip, you know how crowded and strange it can be. As soon as I stepped out of my car, I noticed a little man riding a pink Stingray bike. He wore a Viking helmet, horns and all, painted bright pink to match. It was an odd sight, but in this part of town, it barely stood out. The sidewalks were busy, and among the crowd, the women looking for customers were easy to spot. They wandered the boulevard, their eyes searching, their faces telling silent stories of struggle. Some of them were about my daughter's ages, and a tight knot formed in my stomach. It hurt to think about how they ended up here. Most of them, I imagined, had been through more than their fair share of hardship, trapped by addiction, abandoned by people they once trusted, left with little self-worth. They were misfits in society, caught in a life they likely hadn't chosen but had little way out of. I had seen them for years, new faces replacing the old, but the numbers never seemed to change. I hurried past, making my way toward a nearby cafe. I wanted to get there early, to settle in before my appointment arrived. Just as I turned the corner, I nearly tripped over someone skipping down the sidewalk. They wore a full wedding gown, its white fabric billowing as they moved. It was another ordinary scene in this part of town. The cafe was a welcome escape, dimly lit, quieter than the streets outside. I found a corner table, away from the noise, and ordered a simple black coffee. Around me, the usual Monday morning crowd sipped their drinks, trying to shake off the weekend. Some of them looked like no amount of caffeine would be enough. It wasn't hard to spot those who had fallen deep into addiction. They sat slumped at their tables, their skin pale, their eyes hollow. I had seen it too many times before, the life slowly draining from them. But what unsettled me most wasn't just the people themselves. It was what surrounded them. Dark, shadowy figures clung to them, feeding off whatever was left. I could hear their laughter, high-pitched, gleeful, victorious. It wasn't the kind of laughter that brought joy. It was the sound of something winning, something taking over. I tried to shut it out. There was nothing I could do for them. By the time someone reached that point, the battle had to be theirs alone. They had to fight to take back who they once were. But I had seen how rarely that happened. Sitting in my quiet corner, I let my eyes wander the room. The paranormal activity here was impossible to ignore. Near the counter, an older woman's spirit tugged at the hem of a young woman's skirt. The young woman, of course, had no idea she was there. The ghost's expression was full of worry. Maybe a mother, a grandmother, trying to get her attention. At the coffee line, a man in a plaid tie was deep in conversation with someone, but standing close, whispering in his ear, was another presence, one he couldn't see. The businessman he was talking to looked annoyed, as if something unseen was stirring frustration between them. Across the cafe, something lurked in the shadows, behind an old partition used as decor. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it watching. It stayed hidden, choosing not to show itself. Then my eyes landed on something stranger. A spirit sat on the floor next to a woman who was gathering up scattered paperwork. He was a large, hairy man wearing a deep purple leotard and an equally extravagant tutu. The fabric fanned out around him in layers of expensive tulle. He was impossible to miss, yet no one else seemed to notice him. I watched, waiting to see if anything would happen. Nothing did. A waitress stopped by to refill my cup. I looked up and gave her a polite smile, but she didn't smile back. Just poured the coffee and moved on. The seat next to me was empty, but in it sat a teenage girl, at least the spirit of one. She sat perfectly still, hands on the table, staring ahead. Her hair was styled in a high, teased-up look, her makeup bold, her outfit straight out of the 60s. She didn't react to me. She didn't react to anything. She glanced once toward the doorway, then slowly faded away. A residual haunting, most likely. A moment stuck on repeat, playing out over and over again. I followed her gaze to the entrance. Who had she been waiting for? A lover? A friend? I'd never know. The door opened. My appointment arrived, walking straight to my table. As I shook his hand, my eyes drifted past him, toward the smiling ghost standing just behind. I smiled back. It's been years since I've had the same encounters with spirits as I did when I was a child. I guess as we get older, we lose our willingness to believe that we're not alone. I still believe, but with more fear than I did as a child. My spiritual encounters started when I was in second grade. We had just moved to a new house. I believe that every house has a room where spirits reside, and in our house, that room was mine. We moved there so my brother and I could have our own rooms, but I couldn't sleep in mine. I told everyone it was because he was afraid, but the truth was, I was the one who was scared. For the first few weeks, I tried sleeping in my room. One night, I prayed to God to let me see my father, who had died when my mom was 6 months pregnant with me. That night, I woke up and saw him hovering over my bed. He didn't speak out loud, but I knew what he was thinking. He was proud of me. He knew I was going to do something great. After that, I wouldn't sleep by myself. I knew my father wasn't bad, but there was just something about that room. Our bedrooms were side by side, and at night, I would wake up hearing noises coming from my room. All my things were in there, and if I needed something, I would run in and run out as fast as I could. As I got older, it became kind of weird to share a room with my brother, so I decided to tough it out and start sleeping in my own room. I was in 5th grade at the time. For a few years, nothing major happened, but I started noticing strange things, like how I could hear every creak in the house from my room. And for a relatively new house, there were too many creaks. Sometimes, the TV would turn on by itself, and I would hear other noises that weren't just the house settling. These things weren't terrifying, but they were unsettling. Then, when I turned 15, things got really creepy. The noises grew louder, and I started seeing things. One night, I had a friend over. We were sitting on my bed, talking and laughing, when suddenly, we heard a sound coming from the window. It was like something was scraping against the glass. That might not sound too strange except for one thing. My room was on the 2nd floor, and there were no trees around my window. We were terrified. We ran out of the room and refused to go back in. But a few weeks later, I had the biggest scare of my life. Up until that point, I had seen ghosts and felt their presence, but never up close. Never this close. One night, I was asleep and woke up suddenly. I rolled over to look at my clock, and there was a man lying in my bed. I froze. He startled me, but oddly, he didn't scare me. He was an older man with salt and pepper hair and a gray beard. He was wearing an old Confederate uniform. I turned over, trying to ignore him, and eventually he left. But after that, I slept with the light on for a month. The next day, I did something I had never done before. I talked to him. I went into my room and said, "I don't know what you're doing here, but I don't appreciate being startled like that." It worked. I never saw him again, but I knew he was still there. Over time, I realized he was protecting me. He warned me about my closet, telling me I had to keep it closed at night. The thing in the window that night, it lived there, and it was not good. He saved me on several occasions. When I was planning something, he would warn me of the bad things that could happen. But as I got older, he started to bother me. I never had a moment's peace without him butting in. Finally, I got so mad that I yelled at him. I told him to go away and leave me alone. Boy, did it work. I didn't feel his presence for 4 years. Recently, I was talking to a friend online, and she gave me a reading. Afterward, we started talking, and I told her about him. She told me that he had been my husband in another life, that he still thought we were married. No wonder he was so upset when I told him to leave. Imagine the woman you love telling you she wants nothing to do with you. After that, I felt him near me just once more. He told me that he finally understood that he was a ghost, and that it was time for him to move on. We made peace. Since then, I haven't had an experience like that again, and honestly, I don't know if I ever will. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. One night, I was driving home from my friend's house in Romeo, Michigan, a rural city. As I approached a traffic light, I noticed a car in the distance, coming from my right side. It was maybe half a mile to a mile away, nothing unusual. I didn't think anything of it and just kept driving. As I went through the intersection, suddenly, that car was right there, headlights blinding me. It was speeding straight toward my passenger door. All I remember is bracing myself, thinking, this is it. I'm going to be hit. Then, nothing. I wasn't hit. Nothing happened. I looked back, trying to make sense of what just occurred. Maybe I had run a red light. But no, the light was green. It was definitely green. For a moment, I was just relieved that I hadn't been in an accident. But then, something didn't sit right. I had my windows open. The radio was off, and yet I hadn't heard anything. No tires screeching, no crash, no sound at all. After that intersection, the road takes a sharp left turn. If that car had kept going straight at the speed it was moving, well, it would have gone off the road and hit a tree. That's when it hit me. When I first saw the car, it was a mile away. Then suddenly, it was right next to me. It would have had to be going over 100 miles per hour, yet there were no tire marks, no crash, nothing. I checked my rearview mirror. The car was gone. Not on the road. Not in a ditch. Just gone. I can't explain it. I should have been broadsided, maybe even seriously injured. But I wasn't. The car was just there 1 second. And then, it wasn't. The more I think about it, the more I start to believe it wasn't a normal car at all. Maybe it was some kind of apparition. I've never really believed in that sort of thing, but I can't come up with another explanation. I don't know if anyone has ever been killed at that intersection. I asked my friend, who has lived in the area for 9 years, and he doesn't remember any accidents there. But maybe at some point, someone was speeding, lost control, and ran off the road. Maybe what I saw was their car. Who knows? Piqua, Ohio, a small town about 30 miles north of Dayton, is crawling with specters. Some are evil, some just unsettling. I've had my fair share of encounters, but these two are my favorites. I live in a relatively old house, over 100 years of wear and tear. I don't know if the past owners experienced anything unusual, but every time they stop by, the son refuses to go upstairs. Honestly, I'm starting to have second thoughts about it too. My first experience happened when I was about 5. It was early in the morning, around 5:00 a.m., and I was getting ready to visit my aunt. I thought I heard something, so I looked toward the door. That's when I saw it, a figure made of white and brown light moving down the stairs. These strange occurrences were rare at first, but everything changed when I turned 11. That's when I made the brilliant decision to go on a ghost hunt with my friends. My mistake. Talking about it over the phone that night, it was like I had triggered something. All hell broke loose. The TV turned on and off by itself. Lights flickered. A broken RC car suddenly zoomed across the floor. While lying in bed, I felt something jump on me. And my dreams, they were plagued by nothing but eyes. Just staring eyes. Still, I went through with the ghost hunt. We set up a camera at the top of the stairs, a light detector on the landing, and an audio recorder near the door. At 1:00 a.m., we started. The night was calm. No wind, no outside disturbances. We stayed in our safe room, the library. At one point, I went to check on the camera, switching the tape, adjusting the focus. As I stood there, I felt a cold breeze from behind me. Then suddenly, it was like I was staring into a tornado. Papers flew out from the walls and ceiling, swirling violently before spiraling toward the bottom window. And then, silence. When it was over, I checked the bottom of the stairs. Everything was gone, except for one lone piece of parchment, sitting in the middle of the floor. The next morning, we reviewed the footage. Nothing. Then we checked the audio. About 30 minutes in, we heard 7 loud thumps, like heavy footsteps. 3 minutes later, a series of rapid taps, like popcorn popping. Digging into the house's history, we found out that the original owner, someone named Gray, had died in the house. Since then, nothing major has happened. But even now, as I sit in the library, where I usually sleep, I can still hear voices whispering in the halls. A few blocks from me, there's an old, dilapidated house. Every kid in town says it's haunted, but I never really believed it, until last year. I was out late one night, playing games with my friend and his cousins. As we passed the house, one of his cousins suddenly screamed. We all looked up. There in the top window was a headless figure. It was smoky, almost transparent, just watching us. Then, in an instant, it disappeared. A few nights later, we returned. This time without the cousins, but with more friends. This time, we saw something worse. The figure was hanging, and its head, it was in the bottom window. We ran. As I looked back, I saw the shadow of a man in the headlights of a passing car, but there was no one there. The next day, we saw something even stranger. All the windows, except for the top one, were boarded up, but at night, every single window was open. A few days later, I told a teacher about it, someone interested in the paranormal. We decided to go investigate, but we had to be careful. The owner, let's call him Mr. B, didn't live there, but he never let anyone step foot on the property. As we approached the house, we noticed something disturbing. Dead animals scattered across the yard. In the middle of it all, a single abandoned Huffy bike. We peered through the cracks in the boarded windows and saw the inside. It was worse than we expected. Mattresses and burnt shutters were piled high, mixed in with other unidentifiable junk. As we left, I told my teacher the story again. The next day, she told us something even creepier. While we were at the house, Mr. B had been sitting in a parked car nearby, writing down every single word we said. After school, we walked by the house again. The top window, the only one that had never been boarded up, was now shut tight. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. First off, I wouldn't call myself a ghost hunter or a die-hard believer in the paranormal. But whenever I read so-called true ghost stories, as opposed to fictional ones, I get this overwhelming sense of despair, almost like claustrophobia, for lack of a better word. It's strange, I actually tear up, and it takes a lot for me to cry under normal circumstances. For some reason, ghosts seem to be a sore spot for me. The first experience happened when I was around 16 or 17. It was late, about 2:00 a.m., and I was alone in my room, sitting on the floor, praying. At the time, I was highly depressed, though I can't even remember why anymore. I'm not particularly pious, but I was feeling incredibly alone that night. Somewhere in my prayer, I asked for a sign, anything to let me know that someone was looking out for me. Just then, the phone rang. I nearly jumped through the ceiling. I hesitated for a second, then picked up. But there was no voice, just a faint hiss on the other end of the line. Later, I asked around to see if a friend had called me as a joke or by mistake. No one owned up to it. So, the second experience happened when I was 19, back in 1990. At the time, I was delivering pizzas for Domino's in a small Wisconsin town called Heartland. There was a set of railroad tracks that ran through the middle of town, and they were a constant pain because they cut off a big chunk of our delivery area. Since we had a strict 30-minute time limit to get the pizza to the customer, those tracks were the difference between making a delivery and losing money. One night I was running late on a delivery. As I approached the tracks, the warning lights started flashing, and the gate began coming down. I hesitated for a second, then made the split-second decision to gun it. But as I saw how low the gate had already gotten, I slammed on the brakes, my tires squealing on the pavement. Annoyed, I sighed and absent-mindedly started fiddling with the radio. Then, I felt it. Someone was watching me. I glanced up through my windshield, and there he was. A man stood on the tracks, glaring straight at me. He was about 6 feet tall, around 180 pounds, with dark brown, maybe black, hair, parted down the middle. He wore a satin bar-style jacket, but more than anything, I remember his expression. He looked absolutely pissed. For a second, I thought maybe they were running tests on the railroad again, and this guy was mad because I almost damaged the gate, or worse, hit him. I glared back. Whatever his problem was, I figured he'd eventually move on. I looked back down, adjusting the radio again. Seconds later, I looked back up. He was gone. Just gone. There was nowhere he could have gone. No buildings, no trees, no cover. He had been standing on the tracks. The only thing in sight was the oncoming train. Moments later, it thundered past. Normally, I would have dismissed it as a trick of the mind, just a flicker of imagination playing with my tired eyes. But one thing sticks with me even now. That look on his face, the sheer, unmistakable irritation. I'm 27 years old now, but growing up wasn't easy for me. I was hyperactive, had trouble paying attention in class, and always spoke my mind, no filter, no sugarcoating. That didn't make me many friends as a kid, but as an adult, I finally found people who understood me. Some have called me psychic, but I never believed in that sort of thing. I always thought those who claimed to have special abilities were just making things up. But then, this happened. As a child, I had a vivid imagination. Whenever one of my pets passed away, whether it was my dog or my cat, I would still see them. Not in the way you remember someone in your mind, but as actual shadows or outlines in the room. I could point exactly to where they were. Of course, the only person I ever told was my little brother, but he was too young to understand what I was saying. Years later, I bought a house in Bradford, Ontario. Nothing unusual about it. Life was normal. Until one night. I had spent the weekend out with friends, partying, and came home late on a Sunday night. I went to bed, expecting nothing but sleep. But something woke me up. At first, I thought someone had broken into the house. My heart started pounding. Then I realized something strange. I was lying on my back, completely uncovered. That almost never happens. I usually sleep on my side, and I always wear something to bed. But that night, I wasn't. I opened my eyes. There was someone going through my dresser. I froze. I shut my eyes, telling myself I had to be dreaming. Then I opened them again. He was still there. I nudged my wife, but she didn't wake up. She was in a deep sleep. The blinds were open, letting in enough light from the street for me to see clearly. The bedroom door was shut, which was normal. But if anyone had come in, I would have heard it. The door always made a noise when it opened. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to attack him, to defend myself. But I was lying in such a way that I couldn't move fast enough without him noticing. So I shifted my right leg to the edge of the bed, getting ready. I focused on him, trying to build up my adrenaline. That's when it happened. The figure suddenly stood up straight. Then he turned his head directly toward me. And I heard it. Not out loud, not with my ears, but in my head, clear as day. You can see me? You know I'm here. His expression changed. Then, slowly, he kneeled down. I thought he was moving to my side of the bed, so I turned my head to watch him, and he vanished. Right into the wall. I just sat there, staring at the empty space where he had been. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was I losing it? Was I dreaming? I got up, walked to the bathroom, and brushed my teeth like it was just another night. Then I climbed back into bed, pulled the blanket tighter around me, and curled up next to my wife. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know it was real. What do you think? Have you ever seen something you couldn't explain? I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. Maybe it's because of the things I've experienced myself. Here are a couple of true stories that still send chills down my spine. I was 7 years old the first time something strange happened. I lived with my grandma, mom, and brother in my grandparents' retirement home. It was a small house with 2 bedrooms, a large living room, a kitchen, and a tiny bathroom. From anywhere in the house, you could see almost everything inside. I had insomnia as a child, and it didn't help that I was terrified of spiders. I often woke up from nightmares about them crawling all over me. One night, like so many others, I woke up from a bad dream. I decided to go into the living room to sit near my dog, Skippy. But the moment I opened my bedroom door, I saw something. A tall, white blur stood near the fireplace. The second I stepped into the living room, it moved. I froze, trying to convince myself I was still dreaming. I hurried to the bathroom, hoping that when I came back, it would be gone. But when I stepped out, it was there again. From that night until I was 14, I saw it regularly. It would drift across the living room, often stopping near the TV as if looking at the pictures on the wall. There were 3 of them, one of my mom, my brother, and me, one of my grandma, and a portrait of my grandpa. During the day, something strange happened with my grandpa's portrait. Every time I looked at it, it seemed like he was looking back at me. No one else in my family noticed this, just me. Years later, during one of our many talks, my grandma told me about my grandpa. He had designed and built this house himself. 2 years after it was finished, just a year after I was born, he passed away in his sleep. He had been sick with a brain tumor for 6 months. Grandpa had spent a lot of time with my brother when he was a baby, but he barely got to know me. Maybe that white blur was him. Maybe he was trying to spend time with me after all. When I was 13, I had a friend named Meredith who lived about half a mile down the road. Like me, she was fascinated by the paranormal. One day, we decided to make our own Ouija board. We used lined paper to write out the letters and numbers, lit a few candles, and sat across from each other. Then we tried to contact the spirit. We connected with someone named Jack. Jack was friendly. Talking to him felt safe, almost comforting. Sometimes, we would ask questions in our heads, and he would answer on the board as if he could hear us. But one day, we couldn't reach Jack. So we asked for any spirit willing to talk to us. That's when things went wrong. At first, this new spirit seemed nice. But then, I asked if it was good or bad. It spelled out, bad. Meredith nervously asked if it was in the room with us. At that exact moment, we both felt it. A freezing, heavy presence pressing down on us. The air felt thick. Still, for some reason, we asked it to prove it was really there. That was a mistake. The light flickered on and off. Our candle blew out, then relit itself. A lamp on the dresser crashed to the floor. Then, out of nowhere, both of us felt a sharp tug on our hair, like something was trying to pull us back. That was enough for us. We bolted out of the room and ran straight to the backyard, hiding near her pony as if it could somehow protect us. After a while, we gathered the courage to go back inside. But from that night on, we made a promise. We would never ask for anyone but Jack again. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain? Looking back now, I realize that something that happened to me about 20 years ago may have had a supernatural element to it. At the time, it scared me, but when you're 16, there's so much going on in life that it's easy to brush things off. It was 1976, and my mother and I had just moved into a house across the street from my grandmother. Before that, we had lived with my grandmother until I was 11, so I was already familiar with the neighbors. The house had belonged to an older couple, and I remembered that their granddaughter, Shelley, used to visit sometimes. After the husband passed away, his wife moved out and decided to rent it. The house wasn't particularly old, maybe 25 or 30 years, but it had some unique features. It was completely enclosed by a chain-link fence, with no bushes or trees anywhere in the yard. That meant that from any window, you had a clear view of both the yard and the neighbor's property. The house also had a crawl space underneath, raising it about 3 feet off the ground. Anyone trying to look inside would have had to stand on their tiptoes. The floors were all wood parquet, so you could hear and feel when someone walked through the house. These details might seem random, but they became important later. It started during the summer and continued into the school year. I was dating a guy who lived a bit far away, so we talked on the phone a lot. He worked as a busboy at a restaurant that closed around 1 a.m., which meant our calls often stretched into the early hours. There were 2 phones in the house, one in my mother's bedroom and one in the kitchen. I would take the kitchen phone, stretch the cord around the corner, and either sit on the kitchen floor or lie down in the hallway with only the hallway light on. Since we were on a tight budget, we didn't use the air conditioning, so I could hear everything outside. Late at night, while I was on the phone, I started hearing strange noises. It would begin with the front gate rattling. At first, I assumed it was just a cat jumping over the fence, but then I would hear distinct footsteps moving through the grass around the house. It wasn't just once. It happened more than a few times. I would whisper to my boyfriend, "There's someone walking around my house." At that moment, I wasn't even thinking about ghosts. I was afraid of an intruder. One night, the fear got to me. I ran down the hall, jumped into my mother's bed, and woke her up, insisting that someone was in the yard. We turned off all the lights and peeked through the windows, but there was nothing. The yard was wide open. No trees, no bushes, just an empty lawn. If anyone had been there, we would have seen them. Another time, I was sitting at my desk late at night writing. It was around 1 a.m., and my desk was right under a window facing the backyard. I had a small desk lamp on, focused on my writing, when suddenly I heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching my window. They weren't distant. They were right there, just feet away. I froze. My heart was pounding. I was too scared to look up, afraid I might see something staring back at me through the glass. The fear was overwhelming. In a panic, I jumped up, knocked my chair over, and sprinted to my mother's room. I leaped onto her bed, waking her up, yelling that someone was in the yard. Again, we checked. Again, there was nothing. No one. But I knew what I had heard. The strange occurrences continued. One morning during the school year, I woke up feeling unwell and decided to stay home. My mother always told me that if I stayed home, I had to let my grandmother know, just so she wouldn't worry. I was lying in bed, awake but with my eyes closed, when I heard noises coming from the kitchen. This didn't alarm me. I figured it was my grandmother stopping by to grab something. Then, I felt it. Someone was walking down the hall toward my room. I could sense the footsteps through the vibrations in the floor. I wasn't scared. I assumed it was my grandmother. But as this person reached my doorway, something strange happened. In my mind, I wasn't picturing my grandmother. I was picturing an older man, taller, with a familiar presence. The thought reminded me of my grandfather, who had passed away years earlier. The figure stood there for a moment. Then, in the gentlest motion, it pulled the blanket up over my shoulder. It felt comforting, natural. I didn't even think twice about it. Later that day, my mother went to visit my grandmother. A little while later, she called me, sounding annoyed. She asked why I hadn't let my grandmother know I was home. Confused, I told her that my grandmother had been in the house that morning. I even mentioned how she had covered me up. But my grandmother swore she had never been inside. The final event still unsettles me. One night, around 3 a.m., my grandmother called our house. She asked my mother to check if I was in bed. As it happened, I was sleeping in my mother's bed that night, so she reassured my grandmother that I was right there. My grandmother hesitated, then explained why she had called. She said she had heard me knock on her door, a certain knock that I always used, and call out her name. When she got up and checked, no one was there. She had been so sure that it was me, but it wasn't. We only lived in that house for 2 years. After we moved, nothing like that ever happened again. But I still wonder about it. Who was walking around the house at night? Who pulled the blanket over me that morning? And who knocked on my grandmother's door? What do you think? Could it have been something more than just imagination? This is the story that made me believe spirits really do return when they have unfinished business. I was born on April 8, 1980, on an island called Guam, though I grew up on a nearby island, Saipan, which is just a 30-minute plane ride away. The day I was born, my grandmother passed away, but at the time, my parents had no idea. We didn't have a telephone back then, so there was no way for the news to reach them immediately. 2 weeks after my birth, on a quiet night, I was home alone with my mother. My father and older sister had gone out to buy baby supplies, diapers and milk, since, according to my mother, I was quite the messy little baby. At some point, my mother left the room where I was sleeping, shutting the door behind her, and went to use the bathroom. She was gone for less than 2 minutes. When she returned, she immediately noticed something strange. The door she had firmly closed was now slightly open. Cautiously, she stepped inside, expecting to see nothing out of the ordinary. But instead, she froze in shock. Standing by the bed was an apparition of an old woman with long hair. dressed in a flowing white gown. My mother gasped, unable to believe what she was seeing. The figure looked eerily familiar. After a few moments, she realized it was my grandmother. Fearful but determined, my mother spoke. "Nana, please don't hurt my baby. She's your granddaughter. Please put her down." Then, as if listening to my mother's plea, my tiny, levitating body began to gently descend back onto the bed. The most unsettling part, I wasn't crying. I was laughing. A soft, joyful giggle, as if I recognized the presence of my grandmother and was comforted by it. Once I was safely back on the bed, the apparition disappeared. The room was still again, as if nothing had happened. My mother was left standing there, struggling to make sense of what she had just witnessed. Later that night, when my father returned home, she told him what had happened. He listened, his face filled with shock. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a letter. "I just got this from my dad," he said. "Mom passed away 2 weeks ago." My mother's breath caught in her throat. "When exactly?" she asked. My father hesitated, then finally answered. "April 8, 1980, the day I was born." Mr. Graham owned a tiny corner market, and he loved all the children who came by. His smile was genuine, and his heart was made of gold. Even though he barely made a living, he always handed out free candy, which made the kids want to spend all their time at his store. They were there before school and after. He spent his afternoons spinning stories for us, and I loved hearing his latest tale. Mr. Graham was the best storyteller I had ever heard. His words made the stories come alive, and when he spoke, you could hear a pin drop. No one wanted to miss a single word. If a customer walked in, they would stop and listen too, their eyes filling with childlike wonder. Mr. Graham had a way of pulling everyone into his world. His eyes would sparkle as he gave each character their own voice, making them come alive before us. Somehow, every single day, he had a new story. Each one took us to different places, lands of wonder, adventure, and magic. We never wanted them to end. He made us feel special, like these stories were just for us. He should have been writing children's books, but when we asked, he would smile and say, "The stories, they belong to you." Mr. Graham was always smiling, but I sometimes felt bad for him. His clothes were worn, and the knees of his pants were threadbare. He smelled of lava soap, his hair was neatly combed, and his yellowed button-down shirts were always ironed with perfect creases. His shoes, though worn, were polished until they shone. He didn't have much, but he was rich in kindness, in generosity, and in love. He found happiness in giving, joy in his stories, and a family in us kids. I knew he missed his wife. He had never had children of his own, and sometimes, behind that ever-present smile, there was a flicker of loneliness, a brief longing for something, or someone, missing. His wife had died a few years before he opened the store, and I think we were the closest thing to a family he had left. One day, everything changed. After school, my friends and I ran to Mr. Graham's store, like we did every afternoon. But that day, the store was closed. No sign, no note, nothing. It wasn't like him. He was always there, 7 days a week. We stood there in confusion, staring at the locked door, waiting for him to appear. Maybe he had just stepped out for a bit. Maybe he had run out of stories. We waited, but he never came. That evening, my mother sat me down. Her face was serious, and I knew something was wrong. She had spoken to Mr. Graham's landlady at the grocery store. He had passed away. A heart attack, she said. It had been quick. I couldn't believe it. He was gone, just like that. No goodbye, no last story, no more laughter filling that tiny shop. I cried like there was no tomorrow. The thought of never hearing another one of his stories again, never seeing his twinkling eyes or that playful wink, it broke my heart. I knew the other children would be just as devastated. He had been a part of our world, a light in our small lives, and now he was gone. But I told myself he was with his wife again. He had always spoken about her with such love. I was sure they were together now, reunited at last. That thought gave me some comfort. Time passed, and the store never reopened. The neighborhood grew, a big mall was built, and Mr. Graham's little corner market was forgotten. I still lived nearby, but I avoided walking past it. The thought of seeing it empty, abandoned, was too painful. But one evening, nostalgia pulled me back. I was older now, a teenager, and though the area had changed, the little store still stood, untouched and crumbling. The paint was peeling, the building sagging, its windows boarded up. But to me, it was still Mr. Graham's place, still filled with echoes of laughter, candy, and stories. As I stood there, lost in memories, something strange caught my eye. A light, a soft, flickering glow coming from behind the boarded-up windows. I stepped closer. Who would be inside? The building was condemned, unsafe. I hesitated, but curiosity won. Carefully, I pressed my face to the gap between the wooden boards and peered inside. What I saw sent a shiver through me. There in the dim candlelight stood Mr. Graham. He looked just as he always had, broom in hand, sweeping the dust-covered floor of his long-abandoned store. His expression was calm, focused, as if he were simply tidying up before the next wave of children came running in for a story. My breath caught. I knew he wasn't really there, at least, not in the way he used to be. But at that moment, he looked so real, so familiar, that I almost called out to him. Then, without warning, he turned. Our eyes met. I froze, my hands pressed against the wood, my heart pounding. Mr. Graham tilted his head slightly, and then he smiled, that same warm, twinkling-eyed smile I had seen 100 times before. He winked at me just like he used to, and in that moment I knew. He was okay, more than okay. He wasn't lost, wasn't suffering. Then, just as quietly as he had appeared, he began to fade. The light dimmed, his figure softened, and then he was gone. The store was dark once more, silent and empty. I stepped back, my heart lighter than it had been in years. Mr. Graham had never really left. His stories, his kindness, his love, it all lived on. In me and the children who had once crowded his shop, and the memories he had given us. As I walked away, I smiled. Mr. Graham, you will never be forgotten. I was out shopping for Christmas gifts a few years ago when I noticed a man crouched behind a row of trash cans. At first, I thought he was just another person trying to stay out of sight. But then, as I looked closer, I realized he wasn't a person at all. He was a ghost. And not just any ghost. He was wearing a Santa suit. The red fabric was covered in grime, the white fur stained yellowed and dirty. His suit sagged on him, wrinkled and worn. And worst of all, his pants were heavily soiled. A sudden thought struck me. Had he died right there, helpless and alone? The idea made my stomach turn. I didn't want to stare, so I pretended to dig through my purse, keeping one eye on him. The holiday crowd bustled past me, completely unaware of the lonely figure among the garbage cans. I waited, watching, unsure of what he might do. Then he moved. Slowly, he pulled himself up, swaying unsteadily. His body rocked back and forth as if he were still in pain, even in death. I crouched down to his level, hoping no one would notice me talking to someone who wasn't there. If they did, well, nothing I could do about that. For a brief moment, the image of the Santa suit flickered, and I saw the man beneath it. He looked tired, broken. Then, a flood of images hit me. His memories. His life. He wouldn't tell me his name. He said he didn't deserve one. He called himself a failure, a disgrace to humanity. He had once been a soldier. Fresh out of high school, he had joined the military, but after his service ended, he never found his way back. Instead, he ended up on the streets of downtown San Diego. That's where he had lived, and that's where he had died. The years in between, he barely remembered them. Alcohol had blurred everything. He drank more than he ate, and in his last 6 months, he had been sick, far sicker than he realized. The cancer had spread, but the only thing that dulled the pain was more drinking. His street friends kept the bottles coming, and someone had even found that old Santa suit at the Salvation Army. It kept him warm, at least. But toward the end, even the alcohol stopped helping. One cold winter night, the man in the dirty Santa suit took his last breath, alone, forgotten. I felt a deep ache for him. I have to go, I told him, but I'll be back. I didn't want to do this in the middle of a holiday shopping crowd. If I was going to help him, I needed to wait until nightfall, when fewer people were around. I only hoped he would be willing to move on. Some spirits refuse. Some punish themselves endlessly. And I wonder, is that what hell really is? Not fire and demons, but being trapped in your worst moments, reliving your suffering over and over. When I returned that night, he was still there. But now, he looked worse. His form flickered like a dying flame. He shivered, gasped, rocked back and forth. The pain of his last moments was swallowing him whole. I felt a deep sense of urgency. He was about to relive his death. Again. You don't have to do this anymore, I told him gently. You can leave this place. His head lifted slightly, and for the first time, he looked at me. Go away, he muttered. You don't have to stay here, I urged. You can cross over. Find peace. Don't you want that for yourself? His face twisted with pain. I don't deserve peace, he said. I deserve to be here. Right here. His voice was rough, full of regret. Now leave me alone. I can't be helped. And then he faded. The last thing I saw was his shadowy figure, still rocking back and forth, lost in his suffering. Not all spirits choose to move on. Some stay trapped in their pain, convinced they don't deserve anything else, and there's nothing I can do to change that. I wish I knew more of his story, but if they don't want to share, you can't force it out of them. Downtown San Diego is full of people like him, the unseen, the ignored, the ones society looks past. Many live, suffer, and die on the streets, unnoticed and forgotten. Some struggle with addiction. Some carry wounds, both physical and emotional, that never healed. Most have nowhere to go, and when they die, some don't leave. I see them, the ones left behind, the ones who still suffer, even after death, because they believe they deserve nothing else. We need to change the way we see people. We need to stop judging, stop ignoring. There are ways to help. Programs, shelters, places where kindness can make a difference. But until that day comes, if it ever does, people like me will keep trying to help the lost souls who can't find their way home. The forgotten, the invisible, the ones who keep hurting, even in the afterlife. I joined the police force in 1975, and not long after, I was on night duty with a senior officer who was showing me the ropes. It was early morning, around 1:30 a.m., and we were in the station canteen when a call came through. A disturbance about a mile away. We set off immediately, but before we got there, a man frantically flagged us down. He was a big guy, well built, and looked like someone who could handle himself. But in that moment, he was clearly terrified. He was dressed in just his underclothes and a dressing gown, standing beside an old VW Beetle, begging us to follow him. We tried to explain that we were already on our way to an emergency, but he was desperate. He kept saying something had happened to his daughter, something strange. His panic was enough to make us change course. When we arrived at his house, he told us more. He had recently left the military after serving in Northern Ireland and had settled here with his wife. His brother-in-law was staying with them, and they had a large Alsatian dog in the house. That night, the 3 adults had gone out for a drink, leaving a babysitter in charge of his infant daughter. They returned home around midnight, took the babysitter back to her place, and then sat down to watch TV. That's when they heard it. A scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the bedroom floor above them. The baby's cot was in that room. Then the baby started crying. His wife panicked, thinking someone had broken in and was trying to take their child. The husband rushed to open the door leading to the hallway and stairs, but it wouldn't budge. Something, or someone, was blocking it. In desperation, they grabbed a small axe from downstairs, ready to force their way in. Then they heard footsteps coming down the stairs. The baby was still crying, and over the sound of her sobs, they heard a woman's voice whispering, "Hush, don't cry." The husband and his brother-in-law shoved against the door until it finally gave way. Acting on instinct, they grabbed the dog and pushed it into the hallway, expecting it to go after whoever was there. But instead of attacking, the dog turned on its owner. It bit his hand, then bolted straight out the front door and into the street. The two men ran upstairs. There was no one there. But the cot. It was no longer against the wall. It was now sitting in the middle of the room. The baby was awake but unharmed. They grabbed her, rushed out of the house, and sped off in separate cars, one driven by the husband, the other carrying his wife, child, and brother-in-law. That's when we crossed paths with him. At the house, I could see the damage to the door where they had tried to break through. There were empty beer bottles on the table, but despite that, the man didn't seem drunk. My colleague and I searched the house. Upstairs, I found the cot exactly as he had described, in the middle of the floor. My partner checked downstairs. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign of anyone else. After finishing our checks, we stepped back outside. Our police van, a Ford Transit, was parked with the driver's side facing the house. My colleague turned it around, so the passenger side was now closest to the property. As I stood there, taking the man's details in my notebook, I asked if the house had been fully secured. He assured me it was, except for a small downstairs window, about 3 feet by 18 inches. I walked over and closed the latch from the outside. Everything was now locked up. I returned to the man, and he gave me the address of a relative he'd be staying with. Just as we were about to leave, I glanced up at the bedroom window, and I froze. The net curtain moved. Behind it, looking directly down at us, was the face of an elderly woman. She wore glasses. Her hair was pulled into a neat bun on top of her head. I stared at her for a good 10 seconds. So did the man. Then, without a word, he turned, got into his car, and drove away, fast. In my 23 years as a police officer, this is the one event that truly unsettled me. Even now, thinking back, it makes me uneasy. The house still stands to this day, somewhere in the northwest of the UK. I don't know who that woman was. I don't think I ever want to. I read the account from the assistant chaplain stationed at Camp Zama in the 1980s, and I felt compelled to share my own experiences from my time there between 1987 and 1994. I lived at Sagamihara Housing Base and worked at the 69th Finance at Camp Zama. Before I get into the terrifying parts, I'll start with the strange but milder experiences. Many times while working alone, I would get the strong feeling that I wasn't actually alone. I couldn't see anything, but the presence felt real. I always brushed it off, telling myself I was just imagining things. Still, I found myself finishing my work as quickly as possible so I could leave. On several occasions, I saw someone walk past my open office door. Thinking it was my assistant arriving early, I would wonder why he didn't come in, but every time I got up to check, there was no one there. The building was empty, and yet there was no possible way for anyone to leave without walking past me again. At the time, it didn't scare me, just left me puzzled. It wasn't until around 1992 that I heard stories from others about apparitions at Camp Zama. That's when I realized it wasn't just my imagination. The truly terrifying events, however, happened at home. Eventually, I stopped sleeping in my bedroom altogether. There was just too much disturbing activity, both day and night. At one point, I even considered seeking psychiatric help because what I was experiencing seemed impossible. But I kept telling myself, if I know it's not real, I must not be losing my mind. I don't know how many times I was jolted awake by the feeling of something sitting on my bed. It was a waterbed, so I could see the indentation as if someone had actually sat down. The mattress would move, the water would slosh, and I would be out of there in seconds. It didn't happen every night, but it happened enough times that I couldn't ignore it. Then, things got worse. I started waking up to something on top of me. The experience was so horrific that I still can't bring myself to describe exactly what it was doing to me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, completely paralyzed until it was over. I kept telling myself it had to be a dream, even though I knew I was awake. I desperately searched for answers. I read everything I could find on the subject, and most sources insisted it had to be sleep paralysis. But then I read the entity, and it described exactly what I was experiencing. For a long time, I suffered in silence, convinced no one would believe me. Finally, I confided in two people, my best friend and her son, who is a minister. He listened carefully and then gave me a piece of advice that changed everything. He told me that the next time it happened, I should pray to God for help and tell the spirit, in the name of God, leave and never return. The next time it happened, I did just that. Even though I couldn't physically speak, I focused all my thoughts on those words, forcing them out in my mind as powerfully as I could. I had to do it several times, but eventually it stopped. Since then, I've read even more about ghosts and hauntings. I've come to the unsettling conclusion that I may have invited this presence into my life years earlier, when I played with a Ouija board as a teenager. Even now, I sometimes wonder if I was just losing my mind. But deep down, I know what I experienced was real. And that's what truly haunts me. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I'm a military wife living on a Marine base in Okinawa, Japan. We've been in our current apartment for about 2.5 years, and from the very beginning, strange things have happened. At first, it was simple. Doors slamming shut or opening on their own. Annoying, but easy enough to explain away. But then, things got real. My husband is a skeptic, the kind of person who has to see something to believe it. He was never one to jump to conclusions. But one night, we both heard something that neither of us could explain. That evening, I had put our 3 small children to bed. I shut all their bedroom doors, along with the door that separated the hallway from the living area. Our couch faces away from that door, so once the kids were tucked in, my husband and I settled in to watch a movie. About 15 minutes later, we both heard it, the rattling of a doorknob. Then, the door opened. A few seconds later, we heard a timid voice call out, "Mommy." Without even looking, I threw my hands up, ready to scold my 3.5-year-old daughter, Lisa, for getting out of bed. But when I turned toward the doorway, it was empty. Confused, I got up, expecting to find her hiding behind the door or running down the hallway. But the hallway was empty. More unsettling, all the bedroom doors were still shut. I hurried to check her room and found her sound asleep, curled up in bed, just like her siblings. Feeling unsettled, I walked back to the living room and asked my husband, "Did you hear that?" He nodded. "You mean Lisa calling your name?" We just stared at each other. Neither of us had an explanation. After that, strange things continued happening. Sometimes I would catch the reflection of something moving behind me in the stainless steel kitchen cabinets. I would spin around, expecting to find my husband or one of the kids, but there was never anyone there. Other times, I would hear Lisa's voice calling "Mommy" from just a few feet away, only to realize she wasn't even in the apartment. The strangest experience happened one night while my husband and I were watching Letterman. Across the room, about 20 feet away, I suddenly saw something. It was a shadow, but not just any shadow. It was a little girl, standing in the middle of the floor, swinging her arms back and forth. She was just there. For 4 to 5 seconds, I was frozen in shock, unable to move, unable to even say anything to make my husband look. My breath caught in my throat. Then, as if sensing my fear, my husband turned to me, alarmed. "What? What is it?" Just as he started to look in the shadow's direction, it moved. The shape suddenly jumped, almost as if it had leaped upward, vanishing into what looked like a swirling cloud before disappearing into the lamp. I was too shaken to speak. Since then, I've caught glimpses of a child in a wall mirror, positioned right at my eye level, and I'm 5'3". It's always just for a second, but enough to make my heart race. And it's not just in our apartment. Just last weekend, at a USO on a different base, I was filling soda cups for my family when I saw a little girl run quickly behind me. I assumed it was Lisa. But when I looked around the corner, she was still sitting at the table with my husband and the other kids. I shook it off. Maybe I was just seeing things. But it happened twice more. I don't know what to make of it. Is it a ghost? A lost spirit? Or is it something else?